Picture a field. Not a pretty field. Not the rolling green postcard version that gets put on calendars and sold to tourists. A real field. Low and wet and worked by hand every single year by people who had absolutely nothing else. Now fill it with the smell of death. Not the sudden death of a battlefield. Not the dramatic death of a plague city. Something slower. Something that comes from the ground itself, from the thing that was supposed to save you, rising up through the soil like a betrayal so complete that generations of people who survived it never quite had words for it in English. They had words for it in Irish, and Gortamor, the great hunger, not the great famine. Hunger. Because the food was there. The ships were still leaving the ports, the granaries were full, and people were dying in the ditches with grass stains on their lips from eating whatever they could find. That's where we're going tonight. County Mayo, Ireland, September of 1845. You're 19 years old, and you're standing at the edge of a field that should have fed your family for the next 12 months, and something is wrong. The stalks are still standing. They look almost fine from a distance, but you've been farming this land since you were old enough to hold a spade, and you know what a healthy potato field smells like in harvest season. It smells like cold earth and rain and something almost sweet, something green and living. This doesn't smell like that. This smells like something is dying underground. Add to that the fog that's been sitting over the valley for 3 weeks, the cold that came too early this year, the whispers from the Connollys down the road that their field in the lower hollow had stalks gone black overnight, and you've got something that sits in your chest like a stone. You haven't told your father yet. You should tell your father. But you're standing here in the grey morning with your boots already soaked through and the mud pulling at every step, and you're hoping that if you just look a little longer, you'll see something that tells you you're wrong. You're not wrong. Welcome to Ireland, 1845. A place where you can stand in a green field in a green country and still starve. A place where the rent is due whether your crop lives or dies. A place where the most political act a person can commit is simply continuing to exist. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists looking at thatched cottages and fiddle music and the pretty coastline at Clew Bay. We're living it. One season, one family, one piece of ground. Everything they would have seen, smelled, touched, and tried to survive. I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know if you fall asleep during them, or if you just lie there in the dark absorbing increasingly bleak information about how hard it was to be alive in any century other than this one. Either way, get comfortable, pull the blanket up. We're starting in a field in September, and by the time we're done, you'll understand why the word potato carries a weight in Irish households that it doesn't carry anywhere else on earth. Here we go. The field belongs to your family the way rented things belong to anyone, which is to say, it doesn't really belong to you at all. The land is owned by a man named Colonel Reginald Staunton, who lives in a house outside Exeter and has visited County Mayo exactly twice in his life, both times briefly, both times under the impression that the scenery was picturesque and the tenants were charmingly rustic. He employs an agent named Croft to manage the estate, collect the rents, and deal with any complications that might arise from the fact that several hundred Irish families depend on this land to live. Croft is not a complicated man. He has a ledger. In the ledger are numbers. The numbers are supposed to add up. When they don't, Croft has tools available to him. You don't think about Croft more than you have to. Your family You, your father Padrig, your mother Brigid, your sister Oif, who is 14 and already better at most things than you are, and your brother Ciaran, who is 10 and largely feral, occupies a one-room cottage on a half-acre of ground at the edge of the townland of Carronaut, which is a collection of about 30 families in the soggy lowland between two hills that don't have names anyone uses anymore, just west of the road to Castlebar. The cottage is stone, which sounds more solid than it is. The stones were fitted without mortar by your grandfather, and the mortar situation has not improved since then. Gaps in the walls are stuffed with turf and straw and mud and whatever else came to hand over the years. The roof is thatch. The floor is dirt. There is a hearth in the centre of the room, not against a wall in the centre, so the smoke rises and hopefully goes out through the hole in the roof, though it doesn't always. And around that hearth is where everything happens. Cooking, sleeping, arguments, prayers, everything. The door is low enough that your father has to duck. He's always ducked through it, and you're almost as tall as him now and you've started ducking too. It's automatic. You don't even notice anymore. On cold nights, and most nights, from October to April qualify, the family sometimes shares the cottage with the pig. The pig is named nothing, because naming the pig makes it harder to eat the pig, and eventually you always have to eat the pig. You've made this mistake before. You're not making it again. This is not unusual. This is just how things are. Your family's half-acre grows 3 things: potatoes, more potatoes, and a small plot of oats that goes to pay the rent, because you don't eat the oats, you sell the oats, and you don't sell the potatoes, you eat the potatoes, and this arrangement has sustained your family for as long as anyone can remember, and will continue to do so forever. That's what you believed anyway, on the morning we're talking about. The specific potato your family grows. Your family and almost every other tenant family in Mayo, and most of Connaught, and a significant portion of the rest of Ireland, is called the lumper. It is not a beautiful potato. It is not a proud potato. If you gave it to someone who'd never seen a potato and asked them to describe it, they would use words like misshapen and nobbled and possibly aggressively ugly. It is pale and blotchy and often grows in strange configurations, one tuber fused with another, bulging in unexpected directions. But it is reliable, or it was reliable, or everyone believed it was reliable, which in 1845 amounts to the same thing. The lumper yields more food per acre than almost any other variety. It's hardy. It tolerates the wet Irish soil, the Atlantic rain, the short-growing season. A healthy acre of lumpers can produce enough food to feed a family of 5 for the better part of a year. Can, present tense, conditional. You're learning the difference. Your family eats somewhere between 7 and 14 pounds of potatoes per person per day. That's not a typo. That's not some kind of exaggeration for effect. That's the reality of subsistence farming in pre-famine Ireland. You eat potatoes for breakfast. You eat potatoes for dinner. You eat potatoes for supper. You eat them boiled, mostly, with a little buttermilk if you have it, with some salt if you don't. You eat them with herring sometimes, or cabbage or whatever else is available. On good days, the variety. On bad days, just the potato. On the best days, and there have been plenty of best days, enough to make you almost complacent, a heap of steaming boiled potatoes poured out onto the table, and everyone reaching in, and the warmth of the hearth, and your mother singing something half under her breath, and your brother throwing bits at the dog, and your sister looking like she wants to throw bits at your brother, and your father saying nothing but watching his family eat and looking like a man who has everything he needs. You understand now that you are older that those moments were wealth. They didn't look like wealth. They looked like Tuesday. But they were. You've been out of bed since before the light. Sleep in the cottage is not like the sleep you're drifting toward right now. Warm under your blanket with the soft sounds of the world outside. Sleep in the cottage is communal. The whole family on the one bed, or rather on the straw mattress on the raised platform your grandfather built into the far corner. Thick straw in summer, thin straw by February. Always slightly damp, always smelling of turf smoke and the particular human warmth of too many people in a small cold room. You sleep on the outside, because you're the eldest son and you get up first. Your mother is already at the fire when you swing your legs over the edge. She was up before you. She's always up before you. She's been up before you for as long as you can remember, and you suspect she was up before you the day you were born. The fire, a low brick of turf smouldering rather than burning, because you don't waste turf on a good fire when a bad one will do, throws reddish light over the room. The pot is over it. Water for the potatoes. Always water for the potatoes. Your feet hit the dirt floor and the cold comes up through your soles, like it has a message for you, and the message is that September is not summer. The walls breathe a faint current of outside air through every one of their inadequate gaps. Your breath is visible. You pull your shirt over your head. Woolen, rough, the kind of wool that doesn't so much keep you warm as remind you that warmth is theoretically possible. Trousers, equally rough, patched at both knees by your mother with a different wool that doesn't quite match. Jacket. Boots. Good boots. Your one good thing. Inherited from your father's brother who went to Liverpool and didn't come back. They're too large by 1/2 inch, and you've stuffed the toes with rags, and after a morning in the field, they're soaked through, and stay soaked through until you take them off, which you're reluctant to do because the floor is cold. Seamus, your mother, not looking up from the fire. Ma'am, the Connolly boy came last night when you were asleep. Said his father wants Padraig to come look at something in the lower field. Something in how she says it. The particular flatness she uses when she's not telling you the whole shape of a thing. Did he say what? A pause. The turf crackles. Outside, wind against the thatch. He said the stalks. That's all she says. You don't ask for more. You take the wooden bucket from beside the door and go outside to fetch water from the stream, and while you walk the 40 yards down the slope to where the stream cuts through the lower pasture, you think about what it means that someone came over in the night to talk about the stalks. The stream runs cold and quick over grey stones. It always does. Even in August, when everything else is dry, the stream keeps moving, fed by something you can't see higher up the hill. You fill the bucket. Your hands in the water go numb in seconds. That fine-boned ache that starts at the fingertips and works up through the wrists and means you'll be clumsy for the first hour of whatever you do next. You're used to it. You learnt the trick of working through it years ago. Keep moving. Keep the fingers working. Don't let them stop, because stopping means seizing, and seizing means useless. The bucket is heavy when full, heavier than you think it should be for the size of it. 20 pounds, maybe more. You carry it back up the slope with both hands, the water sloshing, your arms burning at the shoulder joints, and you tip most of it into the pot over the fire and refill the smaller jug for drinking and washing. Your father is up by the time you're back. Padraig O'Mershew is 43 years old, which in 1845 in County Mayo is what you might charitably call getting on. He looks 60. His hands are the defining feature. I'm not going to tell you his hands are like gnarled root vegetables because that's the kind of metaphor that reduces a person, but they are extraordinary hands, thick and calloused and permanently stained dark at the knuckle. The kind of hands that have been working the same cold, wet ground for 20 years and have shaped themselves around that work, shaped themselves to the spade handle and the weight of a bucket and the particular grip you use when you're reaching into the soil to pull a potato free. He reads the expression on your face the way men who work the land learn to read everything, quickly, without wasted attention. The Connolly field, he says. Mam said, I'll go after we eat. He sits down on the low stool by the fire, stares into the coals. Did you smell it yesterday? You hesitate. At the edge, near the ditch. He nods. He doesn't say anything else. That's when you understand that he already knows. He knew before the Connolly boy came. He's been knowing something was wrong for days, maybe weeks, and not saying it. Because saying it makes it real, and there's a long tradition in this part of the world of keeping certain things not quite real for as long as possible. Breakfast is yesterday's potatoes, cold, boiled in their skins. They taste like potatoes always taste, floury, solid. The flesh almost mealy in a way that's either comforting or depressing, depending on the state of your soul that morning. You eat standing up. Your mother eats sitting on the edge of the bed, feeding a bite to Kieran first, then herself. Oif eats quickly and goes outside. She has a way of absenting herself from rooms when she senses trouble, which your mother says is intelligence and your father says is strategic, which amounts to the same thing. The potato skins, the ones without any flesh left, go to the pig. Your father doesn't speak on the walk down the Boreen. The Boreen, Boithrin Little Road, is the narrow track between two overgrown ditches that connects your property to the road, that connects to the road that eventually, after considerable effort, connects to Castlebar. In dry weather it's navigable, in wet weather it's a negotiation. This morning it's somewhere in between. The mud has a skin on top, just thick enough to fool you into thinking it might hold, and then gives way when you step on it, so your boots sink an inch and come back up with a sucking sound. Over and over 100 yards of this, the sound of your boots against the mud making a conversation with itself. Suck, suck, suck. The fields on either side of the Boreen belong to neighbours. The Denyon, the Flannery family, the widow O'Brien who manages her land with help from her son and her own considerable stubbornness. All potatoes. As far as you can see in the grey morning light, the rolling cultivated ridges called lazy beds, though lazy is the last word you'd use for the labour that made them, run across the landscape like stitches on a wound. They look fine, or they look nearly fine, or they look the way a thing looks when you want it to look fine and you're willing to be fooled. The green is still green, the leaves still reach for the pale sky, but there's a smell, faint, below the smell of mud and rain and the wet grass and manure smell of every Irish field in every season. Just there, at the edge of what you can name, something sweet but wrong. Something sweet the way meat smells sweet, right before it smells like something else. You don't mention it to your father. He doesn't mention it to you. You walk in silence through the smell. Connolly's field is at the lowest point of the townland, where the land flattens out and the drainage is poor and the soil sits wet even in dry summers. Tom Connolly is already there when you arrive. His eldest son Cormac, your age, your friend since childhood, since the two of you used to steal turf from each other's piles as some kind of obscure competition whose rules neither of you ever quite established, stands a few feet behind his father, arms crossed, looking at the field with an expression you don't have words for. Tom Connolly is looking at the field too. You all stop, you all look, and then you understand what the smell was. The far half of the field, maybe an acre, the lower wetter acre, has gone black overnight. Not all of it, not completely. But the stalks, which were green and upright 3 days ago when you walked past, have collapsed. They're lying flat, as if something pressed them down from above. The leaves are turning, some of them already that dark brown-black that starts at the edges and works inward. The whole thing has a wet, slimy look, like the field itself is sweating. The smell is stronger here, unmistakably stronger. Sweet and fetid and strangely chemical, a smell that has no business being in a potato field, a smell that belongs in a place of rot and decay, and not in a field that was supposed to see you through winter. How much, your father says. His voice is careful, the voice he uses when he's measuring something. Tom Connolly doesn't look at him, keeps his eyes on the field. Half, maybe a bit more. The top half is fine, far as I can tell. Won't know till I dig. When did it come? Night before last, I think. It was fine Monday. Yesterday morning, Connolly stops, swallows. Yesterday morning it looked like this. 2 nights. Half an acre of potatoes, gone in 2 nights. Your father walks down to the edge of the ruined stalks and crouches. He reaches out and touches one of the collapsed leaves, then pulls his hand back and looks at his fingers. He rubs them together. You can't see his face. Cormac comes to stand beside you. He smells of the same morning your family has. Turf smoke and damp wool and sleep not quite shaken off. The old men, Cormac says quietly, not quite to you, are saying they've seen it before. Not this bad. Some of them remember something like it 30 years back, but nothing like this. Did they say what it was? Cormac looks at you. His eyes are tired. He's 16, a year younger than you, and he looks this morning like someone trying to carry something too heavy in a way that doesn't show. They didn't know what it was 30 years ago either. Your father digs. This is what you do when you don't know what else to do. You go back to the ground. You put the spade in the earth and you lever it up and you find out what's there. He brought a spade from your house. He positions himself on the ridges at the edge of the ruined section, sets the blade against the ground and pushes down with his foot. The soil comes up, dark, heavy, waterlogged, smelling of its own cold interior world, and then the potato, or what was a potato. It comes up black. Not black the way a bruised potato is black, with a clear delineation between healthy flesh and damage. Black the way something is black when it's been destroyed from the inside. The skin has barely any solidity left to it. When your father picks it up, it shifts in his grip, the flesh beneath the skin already liquefied, and the smell. You take a step back without deciding to. This smell is the smell of a thing that has stopped being food and become something else, something returning to the earth that made it in the most violent and sudden way possible. He drops it. He digs another. Same. He moves 6 feet along the ridge. Same. He moves again. Same. He stands up. His back straightens. He looks at the field for a long moment. Then he looks at Tom Connolly. Have you heard from the Flannery field? The Degnons? Connolly looks down. James Flannery came at dusk yesterday, his lower field. A pause. And old Daignon. Both his fields. Both fields. I need to go look at mine, your father says. It's not a question. Nobody says anything. In the quiet, a curlew calls somewhere on the hillside above, that long descending note that sounds, in the right circumstances, like mourning. The wind moves through the healthy green tops at the edge of the field, the part that isn't gone yet, the part that might still be all right, and they whisper against each other. Both of you know, walking back up the boreen toward your field, what you're going to find. Your field is on the slope. That's always been your advantage, or your father's advantage, and his father's before him. The slope means drainage. The water runs down and away. The soil is lighter, less waterlogged, drier even in wet summers. You've always been quietly, carefully proud of this, not the kind of proud that you say out loud, the kind that sits in the chest when you walk past and think ours. Not in the legal sense, because nothing is legally yours, because nothing Staunton's family owns is legally yours, but in the sense that your hands made those ridges. Your father's hands, your grandfather's hands, the accumulated work of 3 generations visible in the way the land lies. You stand at the top and look down. The field is green, mostly. The whole upper section, green, the stalks upright, the leaves broad and catching the thin morning light. You feel something almost like relief, almost like you've been wrong about everything. And then you look at the lower third, just the lower third, where the slope flattens out, where the drainage isn't quite as good, where the soil gets heavier, a band of collapse, maybe 30 feet wide along the bottom, the stalks laid over, the leaves already going, smaller than Connolly's loss, much smaller. Your father walks down without a word and digs. He's a man accustomed to asking the earth questions and accepting the earth's answers regardless of whether he wants them. The potato he brings up is black. He straightens again. The spade in his right hand, the ruined potato in his left. He looks at it with an expression that is almost nothing. Not no expression, but the expression of a man deliberately showing nothing. Because if he shows something, he'll have to feel it. And this is not the moment for feeling it. He drops the potato and wipes his hand on his trousers. The top section, he says. How much do you think? You've already been calculating. Eyeballing the ridges, counting the rows, estimating. 2/3 maybe. 2/3 of the field looks all right. 2/3, he repeats. 2/3 of your total crop for a family of 5. To last through a winter that has already shown its intentions. You do not say what both of you are thinking. There are no words in this conversation for what both of you are thinking. Or there are words, but they're too large for the morning, too large for the grey sky and the wet smell and the curlew still calling somewhere above. We dig today, he says. Everything that's still sound, we get it out the ground. The Connollys are, we dig ours first, then we help the Connollys. He looks at you. Get Ewife and the boy. The boy, Ciaran, 10 years old and sturdy as a small barrel, game for any task but requiring constant supervision to ensure the task gets done rather than something tangentially related to the task that he finds more interesting. You go to get them. Walking back up the field, you feel the ground differently. The same slope, the same soil under your boots, the same loose stones and the same ruts from last year's digging. But the ground feels different. The way a floor feels different when you learn that there's nothing below it. The 4 of you dig all day. This is not metaphor or exaggeration. From the middle of the morning until the light is genuinely gone in the evening, all 4 of you, your father on the main ridges, you on the shallower outer ones, Ewife and Ciaran working the gaps and dig potatoes out of the ground. The work of digging potatoes is specific and physical in a way that's hard to overstate. You use the spade to break the ridge open beside the plant, not through it, because you don't want to damage what you're trying to save. And then you get down on your knees and your hands go into the broken earth and you feel for the tubers. They're cold. The soil is cold and clinging and works its way into the gaps at your wrists and under your nails and into the creases at your knuckles. You feel the first potato and your hands know it immediately. The round solidity of it, the skin slightly rough, the weight, the particular density of a healthy potato that is distinct from everything else you might find in a hole. And then you pull it clear and look at it. This one is fine. White pale in the daylight, a few soil clods clinging perfectly sound. You put it in the basket. You reach back in. Another one. This one. Wrong. You know it before you look properly because your hands know it before your eyes do. The skin has given slightly under your fingers, a softness that shouldn't be there, and when you pull it out, the smell comes with it. The particular sweetish rot of a lumper gone to blight. The smell you're already learning to identify the way a doctor learns to identify the smell of particular diseases. You throw it to the side, mark its position mentally. You know that in the coming weeks, if this gets worse, people will try to eat blighted potatoes. You've heard this. You know it makes you sick. You know it kills, eventually. You reach back in. Your hands work through the afternoon until the cold in them stops being a specific pain and becomes just the state of your hands, the ambient condition of being your hands. The knuckles dry and crack where the soil has pulled the moisture out. There is a blister on your right palm where the spade handle caught you at the wrong angle and rubbed itself into your skin. You don't notice these things as they happen. You notice them an hour after you've stopped, when the hands have warmed slightly and the damage makes itself known. Oif works without complaint. Oif works like a person who has already decided that complaining is not available to her and has moved on to the business at hand. She's 14 and there is already something in her face. Not hardness, not exactly, but a kind of settled determination that makes you think, on the days you're not too tired to think, that she's going to be remarkable if remarkable is available to her. Siren works hard for an hour and then needs to be redirected twice, and then finds a frog near the ditch and has to be physically separated from the frog, and then works hard again. He is 10. He is doing his best. Your mother appears at midday with cold potatoes, the last of the morning's batch, and you all stop for 10 minutes and eat standing in the field, and nobody says much, and then you go back to it. By evening, you have a count. The harvest from your 2/3 of a functional field, carefully separated from the small pile of visibly blighted ones that you'll deal with later. Not enough, not impossible, not immediately catastrophic in the way that this morning's walk to Connolly's field suggested. But if this blight spreads, if it gets worse, if it takes more of the upper field, if neighbouring fields are as badly hit as the lower parts of the townland suggest, then what you've saved today is not enough to see the 5 of you to march. Your father stores the good potatoes in the pit behind the cottage. The pit is lined with straw, and covered with more straw, and then earth to keep out the frost. You've stored potatoes in that pit for as long as you can remember. The pit is always the measurement of safety, full in autumn, emptying through winter, the rate of emptying something you track unconsciously, the way you track the level of water in a well. Tonight the pit is less full than it should be. You cover it up. Your father pats the earth over it with the flat of the spade, and it's a gesture that is weirdly tender, like tucking something in for the night. And you don't say that out loud, but you see it. Tomorrow we help the Connollys, your father says, and the Flannery field. And the Flannery field. Padrig. Your mother is standing in the doorway. Her face is in shadow, backlit by the fire. Father Moran is coming tomorrow. Your father nods. He doesn't say anything else. Father Moran is the parish priest. The parish priest coming to the townland in harvest season to talk to the farmers is not routine. He comes in the afternoon, Father Moran, riding a horse that is old and philosophical about the state of the world. He is not a young man himself, 50 perhaps, with a round face that has been weathered into something both kind and exhausted. He is fluent in Irish and English both, moving between them fluidly depending on who he's talking to and what needs saying in which language. He is also, in the specific way of rural parish priests in 19th century Ireland, one of the most reliably informed men within 20 miles of Carrowknowt, because he travels constantly, talks to everyone, and has a network of correspondence with priests across the county that functions, in practical terms, as the only real news service available to people who can't afford newspapers. He sits on the stool by your fire and accepts the cup of buttermilk your mother offers and speaks quietly. The blight, and Drogshoil in Irish, the bad times, or more precisely the bad life, the bad world, is not local. He has letters from priests in Galway, in Clare, in Roscommon. The same story everywhere. Fields that were healthy last week, stalks gone black overnight, potatoes destroyed in the ground before they can be harvested. Some parishes worse than others. The drier soil at elevation faring better. The low, wet coastal strips worst of all. He doesn't know what causes it. Nobody does yet. The botanists in Dublin are arguing about it. The government in London is receiving reports and considering its response. There is talk of importing corn from America. How long? Your father asks. This is the question. The only question. Father Moran looks at his hands. He looks at the fire. He looks, finally, at your father. I don't know, Padraig. In God's truth, I don't know. One season. Maybe it's one season and next year the fields come back. That's happened before. And if it's not one season, then we'll need help. The priest pauses. And help will come. It has to come. Your father says nothing. He looks at the fire in the way he has of looking at things without revealing what the looking tells him. You're sitting on the edge of the bed behind the two men, close enough to hear without being part of the conversation, which is exactly where a 19-year-old fits in this kind of discussion, in this culture, in this century. You listen. You look at your father's hands resting on his knees. You think about the pit behind the cottage and what's in it. Help will come. You want to believe that. You're young enough, barely, that you still believe in the reliable arrival of help when things get bad enough. You've seen it in small ways, neighbours helping neighbours, the priest organising collections for the worst-off families, the thin safety net of a community that has nothing but each other and has learned to share nothing in ways that somehow amount to something. But Father Moran's voice, when he said it, didn't have the certainty you wanted it to have. The priest leaves. An hour later, your father sees him to the door. You watch through the low window as the two men talk quietly in the yard. Things they didn't want to say in front of the family. You can't hear. The wind takes the words before they reach you. Your father comes back in. He sits down. He picks up a piece of turf from the basket and places it on the fire, carefully, like he's placing a decision. We go carefully, he says, to no one in particular, to the room. Everything we have, we go carefully with. Nothing wasted. Your mother nods. She was already there. She arrived at carefully before he said it, because she has always been the one who counts. Ciaran, from the bed where he's supposedly asleep, says, "Can I have more potato tomorrow?" "Sleep," your mother says. A long pause. "Eve said she'd give me hers if I let her have my frog." "You don't have a frog." "I could get a frog." "Sleep." The weeks do what weeks do. They pass. October in Mayo is a grey month. Not the violent grey of a storm, not the bright grey of a crisp, clear day. A grey that settles and stays, that lives in the air, that gets into the wool of your clothes and the stone of the walls, and becomes the ambient condition of everything. The hills are grey above the tree line. The fields are grey and gold where the harvested ridges have been turned over. The sea, visible on a clear day from the top of the hill above Carronaut, is a flat pewter grey that goes on until the sky, and the water get confused about which is which. You harvest everything harvestable. You and your father work the whole town land, moving from field to field with the community's collected spades and baskets, helping everyone salvage what can be salvaged, carrying back to the pits what remains of the crop. The calculation across the townland is bad, not apocalyptic, not immediately. There are families, the ones with better drainage, the ones on higher ground, the ones who just got lucky in terms of where the blight hit and how fast, who have decent enough harvests. Tom Connolly lost about half. Your family lost a third, give or take. Old Daignan in the low fields lost nearly everything, and his situation is discussed in careful, quiet voices by people who are aware that being able to survive the winter themselves makes them, in some uncomfortable way, responsible for those who cannot. This is the geography of disaster. It doesn't hit everything equally. It hits the lowest ground, the wettest soil, the fields most vulnerable to cold and damp, which means it hits the poorest families hardest, because the poor have the worst land, because the best land was taken generations ago, and the worst land was what was left, and in the good years the worst land still grew enough lumpers to sustain you, and in the bad years the worst land is the first to go. The widow O'Brien is one of the first to go. Her lower fields, both of them, complete losses. Her upper field, a narrow strip of acidic rocky soil that never grew much to begin with, partially spared, but not enough. Her son Ian, who is 12 and doing his best, comes to your door one morning with nothing visible in his expression but the thing that shows in the thinness of it, the quality of someone who has been told to come and ask for help, but hasn't yet decided what asking for help costs him. Your mother gives him potatoes without any discussion of return or exchange. You watch this happen. You have watched this happen your whole life. The particular economy of scarcity in which people who have little give to people who have less without any transaction, because transaction is for people who can afford the mathematics of it, and your mother has always operated outside those mathematics, and it has always cost your family something, and your family has always been fine, and you're now in October of 1845 wondering whether fine is still the right word. You say nothing. You watch Ian O'Brien walk back down the boreen with a cloth-wrapped bundle under his arm, and you watch him not look back, and you think about what fine means. The rationing starts without being called rationing. It's not a decision anyone announces. There's no family meeting, no explicit declaration of new rules. It's a gradual adjustment in the portions at every meal. Slightly less on each plate, the pot slightly less full, the second helpings no longer automatic, the leftover potatoes for the next morning just marginally fewer. If you weren't paying attention, you might not notice for a week. You're paying attention. So is Oifi. You can see it in the way she watches the pot when your mother ladles out the portions, the quick calculation in her eyes that she's too careful to make visible. 14 years old, and she already has the arithmetic of scarcity. Ciaran doesn't notice, or if he notices, he says nothing about it, which means he's either not hungry enough yet to register the change, or he's made some 10-year-old decision to not be the person who says so. You're not sure which. You watch him sometimes, your brother, and think about what it would cost to still be 10 and not quite understand the shape of what's happening around you. The pig gets thinner along with everyone else. November brings the first frost. It comes at night silently, the way bad things often do in retrospect. You're asleep and it's cold, and when you wake up the world has changed. The grass stiff and silver, your breath a small cloud that appears and disappears, the mud in the boreen locked solid, your boots hitting it like stone, the satisfaction of ground that finally holds your weight. The frost is useful. It kills certain things. The blight, whatever it is, and the arguments about its nature have reached you in fragments. Priest letters and rumours from Castlebar, talk of a fungus, talk of the weather, talk of God's purposes, doesn't spread well in cold. The potatoes in the pit, carefully covered, are protected. You check the pit twice a week. You dig down through the straw covering and bring up a handful of potatoes and examine each one carefully in the winter light. You have become expert in a way you never wanted to be in the early signs of blight in stored potatoes. The slight softening of the skin that comes before the colour change. The spot of discoloration that starts small and grows. The smell. You can smell it before you can see it now. That sweet, wrong smell that has no business being in a potato pit. You find bad ones. 3, 4, 5 at a time, spread through the healthy ones like a rumour. You remove them immediately, take them far from the pit and bury them. Every bad one you find is a calculation. If this one was in contact with these 6, are the 6 contaminated? How long has it been? When did the rot start? You find yourself thinking about these questions in the moments when your brain is otherwise unoccupied, which in the deep winter, when the farming work slows and the days are short and the long evenings are spent hunched over a fire that's always slightly too small, is often. Your father knows you check the pit. He's never told you to. He's never thanked you for it. But one evening, when you come back in from the check and say, 2 today, the top northeast corner, he nods and looks at the wall in a way that is, from Padre Gomer Shoe, approximately equivalent to good man, well done, you've helped. Christmas passes quietly. This is not how Christmas is supposed to pass in a Catholic household in rural Ireland. Christmas is, or has been, a proper celebration. The fast of Advent giving way to the feast, music and visiting, the parishes filling with people who've come from miles around for midnight mass, the warmth of the church and the singing and the specific feeling of collective exhale that comes when a period of waiting is over. This Christmas is quieter. It's not that people don't try. The Connollys come over on Stephen's Day. Tom Connolly and his wife Nora and all 4 of their children crowd into your cottage, and the fire is built up, and someone produces a fiddle from somewhere. You think it's Cormac's? He's been learning. And there's an attempt at music that is more valiant than skilled, and everyone appreciates the valiance. Your mother has been saving something. A piece of salt pork, not much, bought weeks ago with money you didn't really have. She brings it out for the stew that night, and the smell of it fills the cottage in a way that the cottage hasn't smelled in months, rich and hoy and animal and real. Ciaran sits up straighter when that smell reaches him. He doesn't say anything, just straightens, like a flower turning toward light. You eat well, once, on Stephen's Day. You eat the stew with the salt pork, and you eat boiled potatoes from the pit, and you eat until the actual sensation of hunger goes away, which it has not fully done in some time, and for one evening the cottage is full and warm, and the fiddle is making noise that occasionally resembles a tune, and Ciaran has fallen asleep wedged between the Connolly children like a small satisfied creature. You lie awake that night. The sounds of sleep around you, your father's steady breathing, your mother's lighter one, Ife on the far edge of the mattress quiet, the fire down to a brick of turf that needs no tending, the wind outside constant, the sound of the Atlantic making itself known even this far inland. You think about the pit, you think about how many weeks to march. You think about the calculation you've been doing unconsciously for months now. the running total in your head that you've never written down and never said aloud. So many potatoes remaining, so many mouths, so many weeks. March. The potatoes from the new planting won't be ready until July. Between March and July there's nothing. There's never been nothing before. There's always been something. The tail end of the previous harvest, the very early varieties if you plant them right, the resources you don't have this year, March to July. 4 months. You've been trying not to land on this thought directly, thinking around it, approaching it from different angles, finding excuses to look somewhere else. But in the dark, in the quiet, it's where the arithmetic keeps arriving. March to July, you close your eyes. The fiddle is long put away. There's only the wind. Winter is long in Mayo. This is not a complaint. It's a geological fact, a climatic condition. The simple truth of being 40 miles from the Atlantic at the latitude of northern Newfoundland, insulated by the Gulf Stream but not protected from everything the ocean decides to send. By February you've not seen a warm, dry day in 4 months. The cold is not dramatic, not the killing cold of a continental winter, not the crystalline cold of a Scottish highland, but it is thorough. It gets into everything. It gets into the walls and the bedding and the air inside the cottage and the space between your shoulder blades where the draught comes in through the gap near the door that your father has meant to fix for 2 years. Your boots have developed a crack along the right sole. You've patched it with cloth from an old shirt. The patch holds in dry conditions. In wet conditions, which is most conditions, it holds for approximately 40 minutes before the cloth saturates and your foot is in contact with Irish weather. The pit is lower. You check it, and you know it without measuring. The volume of potatoes has a particular kind of presence in a pit that you feel before you think about it. The way a full barrel sounds different from an empty one when you knock on it. Not audible exactly, but registered somewhere below hearing. The pit is less full. The level of it has dropped the way all levels drop, slowly, then noticeably, and the noticeable arrives before you are ready for it. Your family is eating less than they should. Not dramatic deprivation, not yet, but less. You notice it in the way you notice the boundary of cold in your boots. Not a specific moment, but a gradual accumulation of evidence. You notice it in the weight of the portions your mother puts on the plates and the absence of any second helpings. You notice it in the absence of the pig, who was killed in January, the meat distributed carefully. Some shared with the O'Briens, some salted and rationed out in the smallest amounts your mother could manage, the bones boiled twice for whatever they had to give. You notice it in Ciaran, who has stopped his constant ambient chatter and is quieter than a 10-year-old should be. Children that age narrate their own existence, a continuous stream of observations and complaints and questions and random facts and requests for things they cannot have. Ciaran's stream has slowed. He sits by the fire in the evenings and stares into it in a way that doesn't suit him, that sits on his face like a garment that doesn't fit. Your mother looks at him when she thinks no one is watching. You watch her watching him. In February, news comes. The news comes the way all news comes in Carrownort. Through Father Moran, through men coming back from Castlebar, through the slow relay of information that travels from field to cottage, to boreen to church, and arrives having been handled by so many people that it's sometimes hard to tell where the fact ends and the anxiety begins. The news is the government in London is responding, has been responding. There is Indian corn, Indian meal, they call it, or yellow meal, or simply the meal, being imported and distributed through depots. Relief works are being organised. Employment for men who need wages, money to buy food. The government's view, as articulated by those who know these things, is that the market will provide what the famine took, that food imported through normal commercial channels will fill the gap, that the role of the state is to provide employment so that the desperate poor can purchase what they need rather than simply be given it. This view is the view of Charles Trevelyan, the British Treasury official who is in charge of famine relief. You don't know his name yet. You'll learn it eventually, the way everyone in Ireland learns it eventually. His view, which will shape the official response to what happens over the next several years, is that the famine is a divine visitation upon the Irish, and that any excessive relief would undermine the moral fibre of a people who have grown dependent on the potato. This is what he actually believed. This is what drove actual decisions about actual food distribution during an actual mass starvation event. In February of 1846, you don't know any of this. What you know is that there is a depot in Westport some miles away selling Indian corn at reduced prices, and that the reduced prices are still beyond what most families in Carrownort can spend, and that the Indian corn, even if you could afford it, requires a mill to grind it, and the local mills are not built for this grain, and the corn ground at the available mills comes out in a consistency that, when cooked, does what it does to the digestive system of people unaccustomed to it, which is a specific and unpleasant thing that I will allow you to extrapolate without detail. But some families go. You hear about the walk to Westport, the long queue at the depot, the little yellow bags that people carry home, and the cooking experiments that follow. You hear that the corn cooked right, and learning to cook it right takes time and effort, and a digestive system willing to absorb the educational process is filling, not satisfying, filling. There's a difference. Your family doesn't go to Westport. Your family still has potatoes. Your family is still, by the standards of February 1846 in County Mayo, managing. You're aware that managing is a temporary category. March comes. The potatoes you planted at the start of the week before Father Moran's visit last autumn, the last of the seeds, the ones you kept back from eating with a discipline that costs something, are in the ground. You planted them the way you always plant them, the lazy beds turned and dressed, the seed potatoes cut and set in the ridges at the proper depth. You do this with the particular complex feeling of having made an irreversible bet. You've put food into the ground, food you can't retrieve, committed to the possibility of a harvest 5 months away. The relief work scheme reaches Carrownort in late March. The scheme is simple in principle. The government pays men to work on public projects, road building, drainage, minor construction, and those men use their wages to buy food. Your father signs up. So does Tom Connolly. So does most of the male population of the townland. The work is on a stretch of road 2 miles from the village. Road building, picking stones, breaking larger stones into smaller stones with hammers, laying the smaller stones into a bed, moving dirt. Repeat. The wages are, by any calculation, too low. You know this within a week. The mathematical fact of it is inescapable. The amount of food a working man needs to continue working versus the amount his wages will buy in the current market versus the amount available in the household pit. The arithmetic doesn't balance. Men on the relief works are doing harder physical labour than they were doing before and eating less because their wages don't cover sufficient food and their pit is running down. This is not a secret. Every man on the scheme can do this arithmetic. Most of them are doing it every night. But the alternative is no wages at all. and watching the pit empty without any income to slow the rate of emptying. So you work. You're 19 and strong, or you were strong in September, and you work on the road alongside men who are older and weaker and should not be lifting stone in the cold, and you try not to. Think about the ratio. The stone hammer is heavy. The specific weight of it, 8 pounds roughly, with a handle worn smooth by other hands before yours, is something you feel first in your palms, then in your forearms, then, by afternoon, deep in the shoulders and across the upper back. You swing it into the larger stones and the vibration comes back up the handle every time, a specific percussion in the bones of your hands. By evening your hands are numb except for the vibration, which persists as a kind of ringing in the flesh. The men you work alongside are quiet in the way of men doing tasks that don't require speech. Occasional exchanges, a question about which pile goes where, a comment about the weather, the minimal social vocabulary of shared labour. But not conversation, not really. Not the conversation of men with the energy for it. You notice, most of them are thinner than they were 6 months ago. You've seen these men your whole life and you know what they look like, and they are not that now. The faces are drawn down, the cheeks slightly hollowed, the eyes with a quality that you're going to think about for years because you don't have words for it yet. The quality of people with not enough in them to spend any on unnecessary things. There's a man on the scheme from the townland of Kilmena, 3 miles further west. His name is Martin, and he's old, 60 perhaps, maybe more, and he shouldn't be on the scheme at all except that his son died in February and he has no other income and 3 grandchildren to feed. He swings his hammer in a way that's both experienced and insufficient, the swing that knows exactly how to move but doesn't have the power behind it anymore. On a Tuesday in late March, Martin sits down on a stone during the midday stop and doesn't get back up. He doesn't die. He's not dead. He's just sitting there, and his body has communicated something to him, and he's decided that standing back up at that moment is not something he can arrange. The overseer, a young man from Castlebar who has the job of supervising the scheme and who is, you think, not a bad person, just a person given authority over an impossible situation, comes over and crouches and speaks to Martin quietly, and you watch this and continue eating your cold potatoes that are your lunch, and try to make them seem like more than they are by eating slowly. Eventually 2 men help Martin up and walk him off the site. He doesn't come back the next day. You hear later that he made it home. That's all you hear. The potato stalks come up in June. You watch them every day. You're aware of how this looks. A 19-year-old man spending his spare minutes standing at the edge of a field, watching green shoots with the intensity of a person expecting news. But you can't stop doing it. The shoots coming through the soil is the most important event of the year, every year. But this year it's something more than important. It's the answer. It's the yes or no from the earth on whether the next 12 months are survivable. They come up green, good green, strong green, the right colour, the leaves opening properly, the stalks upright and robust. You feel something happen in your chest that you don't quite name. Not happiness exactly. More like the temporary lifting of a weight you've been carrying so long you forgot you were carrying it. Just for a moment. Just long enough to breathe differently. "Looking good," Cormac Connolly says, coming to stand beside you one afternoon. "Aye." "Your father says the same about ours." "Aye." A pause. The June light on the field. A lark somewhere above. The specific liquid song that seems improbable from any bird, let alone a small brown one. The smell of the field. Good smell now, healthy soil and growing things and the faint sweetness of grass warmed by the sun. "If it holds," Cormac says. "If it holds," you agree. You both watch the field. It does not hold. It comes back in July. The first reports reach Carronaut through the same relay that brought the first ones the previous autumn. A priest letter, a man back from Castlebar, the Flannery boy running between houses with his face showing something you recognise now. The blight. Again. Worse. This time, it doesn't hit the lowest fields first and spare the higher ones. This time, because the summer of 1846 is wetter than the summer of 1845, because the cold and damp that the fungus loves has settled in for the season, it moves faster. It comes across the fields in waves that you can see progressing, literally see, watching from the hill above the townland in the grey afternoons. the green darkening and collapsing in bands that move like weather. Your field goes in 4 days. Not part of it. All of it. You stand at the edge of it on the morning of the 4th day, and the smell is the smell of the end of the world as you have known it. Every stalk down, every leaf going black. The entire productive surface of your family's land, the land that was supposed to see you through another winter, the land that was supposed to give you the harvest that made up for last year's losses, destroyed. You stand there for a very long time. Then you go inside and tell your father. There is a moment when you say the words, when your father's face does something. You've watched your father's face for 19 years. You know its vocabulary. You know the economy of it, the careful rationing of expression, the way certain things get shown only in the smallest ways, and certain things don't get shown at all. You've seen him angry, the contained, dangerous quiet of it. Grieving, the stillness when his brother didn't come home from Liverpool. Proud, the particular angle of his head when something goes right. You've never seen him look like this. It's only for a second, less than a second. And then it's gone, behind the familiar arrangement of nothing shown, and he looks at the wall and nods. Right, he says. That's all. Right. One word that contains everything that cannot be said, all the questions that have no acceptable answers, all the calculations that have nowhere good to end up. He picks up his pipe, nearly empty, the tobacco carefully rationed, and goes to sit by the fire. Your mother is at the table. She heard you come in. She heard what you said. She doesn't look up from the pot she's stirring, but her hands stop moving for a moment and then start again. And that pause, those 3 seconds of stillness, is the most that she shows in that moment. And it's enough. I want to tell you what hunger actually is. Not the hunger you know. Not the hunger of missing lunch or a long day without eating, or the specific pointed hunger of an appetite built up by exercise and deferred by work. That hunger has a quality of impatience to it, of soon, of the next meal as a fixed point approaching. Real hunger, the hunger that builds over weeks and months when the food available is less than the body requires and falls further below that line as the weeks go on, is different in kind, not degree. It starts as that familiar sensation. Then it becomes the background of everything. Not a specific pain, but a state, a condition of your existence that's always present and influences everything you do and think and feel. It becomes part of the weather of your inner life, the way the Irish rain becomes part of the outer weather. Not dramatic, just constant, just always there. Then it starts to take things. Your concentration goes first. You notice this in the relief work. Reaching for the next thought and finding it just slightly further away than it should be. The effort of reasoning through a simple problem taking longer than it did. You have always been good at the rough arithmetic of farming, quick at the calculations of seed and yield and weight and price. That quickness dulls. Your body adapts in ways that are, in retrospect, astonishing in their precision. Your body knows it's not getting enough and begins to economize. You're colder than you should be, because your body's throttling down the heat it produces. You're slower, because slower uses less. You sleep more, or try to, because sleep costs least. The particular quality of the hunger in September 1846, when it's been 2 months since the second blight and you're already into stores that were supposed to last far longer, is a hollow sensation that lives just below your rib cage. Not sharp, not agonizing, hollow. A kind of negative presence, an absence where something should be. You stop mentioning it. This is the specific discipline of people living through scarcity. You stop mentioning the hunger because mentioning it doesn't help, and acknowledging it in the air between people makes it harder somehow, makes it more real and more insurmountable. So instead you work and you sleep and you portion out what remains and you don't say I'm hungry, because everyone already knows. What you watch? Kieran. Your brother is 11 years old now, nearly 12, and the specific vulnerability of a child in that situation is something different from the vulnerability of adults. Children need more, relative to their size. They need the calories for growth, for development, for all the biological projects of becoming a person. When those calories aren't there, the project's slow. Kieran is still himself, still occasional bursts of the old energy, still capable of his particular brand of 10-year-old chaos, still the one who ends up in inexplicable situations. But he's thinner than he was, more tired. He falls asleep earlier in the evenings, the sleep of a body that has run through its available resources and is closing down non-essential operations. You start giving him your portions. This is not a decision you announce. You simply eat slightly less than what's on your plate, and when your mother's back is turned, you transfer the difference to his. You don't know if your mother sees this. You suspect she does, and has decided not to address it. You suspect Oif does the same thing sometimes. There is a particular economy in a family under pressure, which is that everyone knows what everyone else is doing and nobody says it out loud, because saying it out loud costs something that nobody has to spare. The rent is due in September. This is not a surprise. The rent has always been due in September. The rent has always been due in September, and it has always been paid in September, and the rhythm of it is as fixed as the tides. Crop comes in, rent goes out. What's left is yours to survive on. What's left? The clause in that arrangement that assumed there would be something. Croft comes in the first week of September. He rides a solid brown horse and wears a coat that's warm enough for the weather, which is more than you can say for most people he's about to visit. He has a ledger that functions as his record of everyone in the estate and what they owe, and he works through the townland systematically, which is a word that means without sentiment. You know he's coming because Tom Connolly's wife sends her daughter to warn the neighbourhood. Nora Connolly has a system for this, for reasons that have never been explicitly stated. The warning doesn't change anything. You can't produce money you don't have simply because you've been told it's expected. But it gives people time to decide what they're going to say. Your father has been thinking about what he's going to say for weeks. You've heard him rehearsing it in his mind, or rather you've seen it in the way he sits in the evenings, the slight movement of his lips as he works through arguments and responses and possible conversations. Croft comes to your door at mid-morning. He's younger than you expected, early 30s perhaps, with a round, clean-shaven face and small eyes that do the work of adding things up before he's even spoken. He has an assistant with him, a boy, really, maybe your age, who holds the horse and writes things in a second ledger and doesn't meet anyone's eyes. Your father meets him in the yard. You stand back, inside the doorway, watching. You can't hear everything. What you can hear, your father's voice, steady and careful and using the English that is his second language, the language of official transactions and unavoidable confrontations. You hear him explain the blight. You hear Croft's response, which includes the word unfortunately used in the way it's used when the person speaking it doesn't feel the unfortunateness very acutely. Your father explains that the crop is gone, both years, that there is nothing to pay the rent from. Croft has heard this exact conversation 30 times this week. His expression is the expression of a man receiving information that is, to him, a recurring administrative problem rather than a fact about actual people's actual lives. What Croft says, you hear this part clearly, is that he will note the outstanding amount in the ledger, that the rent is not cancelled, only deferred, that Colonel Staunton's estate has procedures for tenants in arrears, and that it would be in everyone's interest to avoid triggering those procedures. The procedures. Everyone in the townland knows what the procedures are, in the way you know what's behind a door you've been told not to open. Your father says yes. He says he understands. He says it in the flat, careful English of a man who understands entirely too much. Croft goes to the next house. Your father comes back inside. He hangs his coat on the peg by the door. He sits down. He doesn't say anything. You go and check the pit for something to do with your hands and your feet and the crawling restlessness that comes over you when you can't make anything better. The pit is lower. October. You haven't been to Castlebar since the spring. You've been in the townland, the fields, the road scheme that resumed and then was poorly administered and then resumed again, the small radius of your daily existence. Castlebar is the county town. It has perhaps 3,000 people in it, which makes it, by your standards, a city. It has shops and a courthouse and a market and a Catholic church that's bigger than Father Moran's and a Protestant church that's bigger than that, and streets paved well enough that they don't become rivers in October mostly. You go because Father Moran asks you to take a letter to a priest in the town, and because you need to see for yourself what the wider world looks like, and because the cottage has developed a kind of interior weather lately, a quality of compressed tension between people too hungry and worried to be entirely easy with each other, that a day's walking would be a relief from. It's 12 miles. Your boots are the inherited ones, still cracked at the sole. The cloth patch replaced with a piece of canvas that holds better. You leave before light and walk in the grey morning, the road rising and then dipping through country that is, despite everything, beautiful in its October way. The bracken gone amber, the gorse still defiantly yellow along the tops of the ditches, the light coming at a low angle that makes shadows long, and the hills look bigger than they are. You walk past farms. You can't help it. You look at every field you pass, automatically assessing. The ridges still visible but not planted with anything now, the empty season. Destroyed fields, obvious from the dead stalk still lying where they fell in July, not turned over yet. The occasional potato pit covered, holding whatever it holds. The other walkers on the road, more than you expected. People going to Castlebar and people going away from Castlebar and people who seem to be walking because movement is the only thing remaining to try. You pass a family, mother, father, 3 small children, sitting at the side of the road resting or possibly not resting. The father looks at you as you pass. You look back. Neither of you says anything. There isn't anything to say that the look doesn't already contain. The approach to Castlebar, you smell it before you see it. And what you smell, cutting through the cold October air, is the smell you've learned in the last year. The sweet, faintly chemical smell of potato rot. Here in Castlebar, larger, concentrated, a town rather than a scattered townland, the smell has gathered and intensified. Not a field's worth, a region's worth. The collective exhalation of a county's failed harvest, carried on the October air. And then you see the people. They're not all at one place. That's not how this looks. They're distributed through the streets of Castlebar in a way that you realise after a moment is too many. Too many people in the streets, not going anywhere particular, not engaged in the purposeful movement of market day or church day. Standing, sitting on steps, gathered at corners in small groups, children sitting on the pavement with the particular stillness that children have when they've run out of the energy to be children. The workhouse is on the edge of town. You didn't plan to go there. You deliver the letter first, find the priest's house, wait in the cold yard while someone takes the letter inside and presumably reads it and responds, wait some more, receive a reply envelope and tuck it into your coat. Then you walk toward the workhouse. You knew what a workhouse was in theory. Everyone knows what a workhouse is in the abstract. It's in the theory of things, in the vocabulary of poverty, in the worst-case narrative that people tell themselves to understand what destitution eventually looks like if everything else fails. The Castlebar Union Workhouse was built for 800 people. Constructed in the 1840s, designed to provide a last resort for the destitute, food and shelter in exchange for labour, strictly governed, strictly separated by sex and age, deliberately designed to be unappealing enough that only the truly desperate would enter. The theory being that if the workhouse is worse than any alternative, only the people with genuinely no alternative will use it. What you see in October 1846, the yard outside the gates has people in it, not waiting to get in. The workhouse is full, not going in, just there, standing or sitting in the yard outside the workhouse that cannot take them because it cannot take any more people than it already has. You stop across the road. The people in the yard are not performing misery. That's the thing that gets you. There's no drama to it. They're just there. They have the quality of objects that have been placed somewhere and haven't moved because moving requires a decision, and decisions require resources that are currently unavailable. A woman sitting against the wall holds a child. The child is maybe 2 years old, bundled in a shawl, not moving. You watch for long enough to establish that the child is breathing, because you're watching for that. And yes, the child is breathing. The slow, regular breath of sleep or something near it. The woman looks at you. She has a face that is, underneath the circumstances, probably ordinary. Probably a face you'd never remember if you passed it on a different street at a different time. But right now it has the quality of something that has stopped being a face in the performative social sense. Not hostile, not pleading, just present. Just there. You look away. You stand there for a moment. The workhouse wall across from you. The people in the yard, the October sky grey and close above the town, and you think about what you're looking at. This is the bottom. Not the bottom for you. Not yet. Not today. You walked here this morning on your own legs. You have a letter in your coat. You have a family back in Caranaut that still has a pit with something in it. But this is the bottom that you're looking at. The place that everything below you leads, and you're close enough to see it clearly. You think about your brother's face. You turn away from the workhouse and walk back through Castlebar toward the road home. On the edge of town, near the road that goes west toward Westport, there is a building with a table outside it. A long table, rough wood, with 3 men standing behind it. They're well dressed. Not wealthy well, but clean and warm and fed, which at this moment reads as almost extravagant. 2 of them are older, grey-bearded. 1 is younger, perhaps 30. There's a queue at the table. A long queue. You count automatically 60, 70 people, moving slowly. At the table, something is being given out. A cup, you think. Something hot. The steam is visible even at your distance. You join the queue because something is happening at the table and you want to know what it is, and because your body, which has been walking 12 miles and is running on less than it needs, has registered the steam as food and made certain decisions without consulting you. The queue moves slowly. You inch forward. The October cold settles in around you while you wait. The people around you are mostly silent. One woman near you is praying quietly in Irish, the rosary. The words running together into a murmur that's less about the words and more about having something your mouth can do. When you get to the table, the younger man looks at you. Sen di aim ata ort. Your name, in Irish. He speaks it carefully, like someone who's learned it recently. Seamus O. Murshu, Seamus Murphy. He writes something in a book. Asks, are you from the town or from outside? Outside, you say. From Carrow Nort, 12 miles west. He nods. He hands you a tin cup. The soup, and it is soup, a thin soup, more liquid than substance, some grain and some vegetables in hot water, is warm in your hands before you drink it. The warmth comes into your palms and up your wrists, and you hold it for a moment before you drink, because the warmth itself is something. The warmth itself is already a gift. Then you drink it. It's not much. The nutritional content of it is probably not significantly better than what you had for breakfast, but it's hot. And it's given freely, without transaction, without the ledger logic that governs every other exchange you can think of. And sitting at the edge of Castlebar on a cold October afternoon, you feel something complicated. The younger man is watching you, not in a way that's invasive, just noticing. Have you family? He asks. 5, you say. Parents, a brother and sister. He nods. He writes something else. He gives you a small package, more of the grain, dry, measured out. You can make porridge from this, he says. Oatmeal. It'll stretch if you cook it thin. You take it. You look at him. He's younger than you thought up close, maybe 25. His face is that particular face of a person doing something they believe in. Not performing belief, but actually animated by it, which is different in a way you can feel. What do they call ye, you ask? Friends, he says. And when you must look blank, Society of Friends, or Quakers. It's what people call us. You've heard of Quakers. Vaguely. Protestant, you think. English, mostly. You didn't know they were here. Thank you. You say. He shakes his head slightly, not dismissing the thanks but not receiving it either. Come back, he says. We're here most days while we have food to give. You walk back through the town with the package inside your coat, warm from the soup, the 12 miles home ahead of you, and you think about while we have food to give. You don't call it a family meeting. Your family doesn't call things. But that evening after the meal, thinner than it should be, the oatmeal stretched with water, your mother cooking it into something that fills the pot more than it fills the stomach. You tell them what you saw in Castlebar. You tell them about the streets, the workhouse, the people outside the workhouse. You tell them about the Quakers and the soup and the oatmeal you've brought back. You lay it out plainly, without drama, because drama is not a thing you can afford right now any more than anything else. When you're done, there's a silence. Kieran has fallen asleep sitting up, his head tipped back against the wall, his mouth slightly open. Even in sleep, his face has that quality you've been noticing, the drawn-down quality, the hollowing. He needs more than you're giving him. You all know this. You've all been knowing this. I've been thinking, your father says. The phrase lands in the room carefully, which means he's been thinking about how to say it as much as what to say. That's his way. He spends time approaching things before he arrives at them. Con Malone's son, he says. Con Malone is a man 2 townlands over. His son went to America 3 years ago. He's in Boston. Con got a letter from him in the spring. A pause. He's working. Another pause. The fire. The low turf burning. There are ships, he says. And there it is. The thing that's been in the room for weeks, since at least the second blight, maybe since the first, the word that everyone in Ireland has been thinking around and approaching and not quite landing on, circling it the way you circle a fire that's too hot. Not for all of us, your mother says. Her voice is steady. No, he looks at her. Not all at once. You wait. Seamus, he says, you're very still. You're the eldest. You're strong. If you get to America... He stops. He's rehearsed this, you can tell. He's been over the words many times, and still the rehearsal doesn't entirely smooth the roughness out of it. If you get there, get work, send money back, get off over when you have enough, then... He doesn't finish. He doesn't need to. The structure of it is obvious. One at a time. The eldest goes first, earns, saves, sends for the others. The chain of emigration that half of Ireland is already on. The chain that will pull millions out of this country over the next decade and deposit them in strange cities on the other side of the ocean. Your mother is looking at the fire. You look at your father. You look at your mother. You look at Alf, who is 14, and who is already nodding slightly, who has already been at this destination before you arrived. You look at Ciaran, asleep against the wall. How? You say. There's a ship from Westport, your father says. First week of November. Father Moran has the details. November. 4 weeks. 4 weeks. And then you leave. In Ireland, when someone emigrates to America, the night before they leave is called an American wake. The logic of this is stark and clear. An emigrant to America is, for all practical purposes, gone. The journey is long, the distance is enormous, and letters take months to arrive. Money takes months to arrange. Return is almost unthinkable for anyone who makes it there with nothing. When you say goodbye at the dock, you're saying goodbye the way you say goodbye to the dead. You don't expect to see them again. You might eventually in some transformed future that neither of you can quite imagine, but probably not. Probably this is it. So you have a wake. The Connollys come, the Flannery family, the widow O'Brien and her son Ian, old Denyon and his daughter. Father Moran comes in the early evening and stays for an hour and doesn't drink anything and says things that are genuine and aren't enough, and knows they aren't enough but says them anyway because saying them is what he can do. Someone brings a fiddle. Cormac, who is still learning, who plays with more feeling than skill, and who you are going to miss more than you can currently afford to feel. The food that people bring, more than you expected, more than people can spare. Small things from small stores, a piece of cheese, a handful of oat seal, something wrapped in cloth that turns out to be a boiled egg, which is an almost incomprehensible luxury at this moment. You understand this as love, the specific form that love takes when people have nothing and bring it anyway. Your mother doesn't cry. She's not a person who cries in front of people. She moves around the cottage feeding people and managing the fire and doing the 1,000 small organisational tasks that have always been hers, and she doesn't cry. Wife sits with you for a while in the late evening, the two of you pressed into the corner while the conversation goes on around you. I'm coming after you, she says. It's not a question. I know. As soon as you have enough, you send for me. Before you have enough even. I can work when I get there. I know. She looks at you. 14, your sister. And she has that quality she's always had. The settled, determined thing. The sense of someone who has made her decisions and is simply waiting for the circumstances to catch up. Don't forget us. The statement is so simple and so enormous that you can't respond to it in kind. You just look at her. I'm not gonna forget you, you say. And then, because it's true and needs saying and you've never quite said it before, you're going to be all right. She looks at you. We're all going to be all right. She says it in the precise tone of a person deciding a thing rather than believing it, which you recognize because it's the same tone you've been using inside your own head for months. Maybe that's enough. Maybe deciding is how you begin. Ciaran finds you later, in the hour before midnight, when the wake has started to thin out and Father Moran has gone home, and old Denyan has fallen asleep on the stool and is going to have to be carried shortly by two people who can barely carry themselves. He sits down next to you. He's quiet for a minute. Are there potatoes in America? He asks. Yes, you say. A lot of potatoes. He considers this. More than here? Different ones. But yes, more than here. He nods. He sits with you a while longer. Then, will you come back? And what do you say to that? What do you say to your 11-year-old brother in the year of the second famine, sitting in the cottage that has always been home, the fire burning low, the last few people talking quietly around you? I'll send for you, you say. I'll get set up and I'll send for you, and you'll come, and it'll be better. He nods again. He accepts this. He's 11. He still has the capacity to accept promises as real things. You hope he's right to. The morning comes in the way morning always comes, without ceremony, without consideration for whether you're ready. You've barely slept. The cottage held the sounds of everyone sleeping for hours while you lay and looked at the thatch above you and counted things. Distance to Westport, 12 miles. Time until the ship, 2 hours after you arrive. The ship, the St. Columba, a converted cargo vessel bound for Quebec, 32 days at sea if the weather holds. Quebec, then south. Boston, eventually if the money holds. There's an address in your coat pocket written in Con Malone's handwriting, the address of his son's boarding house in a neighbourhood called the North End, where the Irish live in the rooms above the rooms above the rooms. You know no one on the ship. You know no one in America. You have 4 shillings and 6pence, which is everything that could be gathered. Your father is up before you. Of course he is. He's standing in the yard when you come out, looking at the field, the ruined field, the empty ridges, the bare earth that gave and then took back and will give again next year or the year after, or whenever whatever is in the soil that's killing the potatoes finally leaves or dies or is overcome. He hears you come out. He doesn't turn around. You stand beside him, father and son looking at the field. He puts his hand on your shoulder. His hand, the extraordinary hand, the hand that built the lazy beds and pulled the potatoes and worked the relief scheme and shook Croft's hand with a grip that showed nothing, rests on your shoulder for a moment. You'll work hard, he says. I will. And you'll remember what you are. And you'll come back for them, for your mother and the children. I will. He takes his hand off your shoulder. He stands for a moment more looking at the field. Then he goes back inside. Your mother gives you bread for the journey. Bread? She's made bread. She must have been up in the night to make it because there was no bread last night. She baked it in the covered pot over the fire. the way you bake bread when you don't have an oven, and it's slightly dense and slightly smoky from the fire, and it is the most generous object you've ever been given. You hold it, and you look at your mother, and she is looking at you with the full force of everything she has, which is considerable. "Momac," she says. "My son." You cannot speak. You hug her. Awkward, Irish farm family awkward, neither of you quite knowing where to put the various parts of you, but the intent is clear enough. And she holds you with the specific strength of a woman who has held things together through forces that would have taken other people apart. You pull back. You look at her face. The face that has been the constant thing, the fixed point, the face that was there every morning when you woke up and every evening when you came in from the field, and every meal and every mass and every fight and every quiet moment. "I'll write," you say. "You'll write," she agrees. She turns back to the fire. She has things to do. She always has things to do. You pick up your bundle and you walk out through the low doorway and duck your head automatically, the way you always do, the muscle memory of it ingrained like everything else about this place. Wife waves from the yard. Ciaran follows you down the boreen for 50 yards before your father calls him back. You don't look back. You're going to look back in your memory for the rest of your life. You're going to reconstruct every detail of that morning. The grey light, the smell of the field, the weight of the bread in your coat, the sound of the boreen mud under your boots. You're going to build it in your mind and walk through it again and again the way you walk through a house you've lived in, knowing where every step creaks, knowing every room. But you don't look back physically. You walk down the boreen, toward the road, toward Westport, toward the ship, toward the sea. The St. Columba is a brig of about 300 tons, which means nothing to you in technical terms, but means, in practical terms, a wooden vessel roughly 100 feet long that is currently filled with 214 Irish men and women and children in the space that was designed to carry cargo. The hold, where you will spend the next 4 to 6 weeks, is between decks, a low space lit by 1 or 2 hatch gratings, divided into tiers of rough wooden bunks, each bunk a shelf about 6 feet long and 2 feet wide. You share your bunk with a man you've never met, a farmer from County Galway named Peda, who is 40 and silent, and has the kind of face that suggests he has already processed every feeling available to him and arrived at a state beyond feeling that he finds more manageable. The smell of the hold is... You need to understand this. The concentrated smell of 200 people in a sealed space with inadequate ventilation on a moving ship. Salt water and unwashed bodies, and the particular stomach-turning quality of people who are about to discover that they get seasick and have nowhere to be sick except here, in this hold, in this compressed world of strangers. The first 3 days out of Westport are rough. The Atlantic in November has opinions about ships and the people on them, and it expresses those opinions through a motion that is constant, unpredictable, and absolute. The brig pitches and rolls in a rhythm that your body cannot adjust to because it never stops long enough to adjust to, only varying the direction and amplitude of the discomfort. You're not the worst affected. Some people are worse, including a boy of about 15 who is sick continuously for 30 hours and then simply lies in his bunk with the quality of a person who has reached the outer boundary of their body's ability to protest anything. You bring him water when you can stand up, because water is what you can do. You eat what the ship provides, biscuit, hard and dense, requiring soaking in water before your teeth can manage it. A daily ladle of water, occasional dried fish. It is not enough. It is, per the terms under which you paid your passage, exactly what was promised, and it is not enough. But it is food. It arrives with the regularity of a system, the ship's cook moving through the hold with his ladle and bucket, and the regularity of it. The fact that tomorrow there will be biscuit, and the day after, and the day after, is a different quality than the anxiety of the pit in Carronaut. The supply is inadequate but predictable. Predictable is something. You count days. On a clear day, 3 weeks out of Westport, the sea shows you something. The clouds have broken and the sun is actually present. Actual sun. Not the tepid Irish version, but a harder Atlantic light that makes the water metallic and the air smell different. Cleaner, wilder, emptied of land and everything land carries. You've been allowed on deck for an hour. The captain makes this accommodation when weather permits, understanding that 200 people in a hold needs occasional relief, even if only 20 can be on deck at a time. You stand at the rail and look west. Just ocean. No land, no coast, no hills or churches or fields. Nothing in any direction except the moving grey-green water and the sky above it and the wind that's been present every day of this crossing, constant, purposeful, moving the ship west. And west is where everything is. You're not a sentimental person, particularly. Sentimentality is a luxury, like most luxuries, and you've spent the last year shedding luxuries. But standing at the rail of the St. Columba in the Atlantic in November of 1846, you feel something that you don't quite have words for. You think about the field in Carronaut, the lazy beds your grandfather made, the smell of the soil in a wet spring, that particular smell of cold earth and rain that is specific to that place, and will never quite exist anywhere else on earth. You think about your father's hand on your shoulder. You think about your brother asking if there are potatoes in America. The water moves under the ship. The wind comes from behind. The sun is going west, same as you, and you follow it. On the 31st day, someone shouts from the bow, "Land." You don't run. Your legs are too stiff from the weeks of confinement, your body too aware of the effort. But you move toward the bow with everyone else, and you crowd the rail and you look. The coast of Newfoundland, dark rock and dark spruce, and the particular colour of a northern November shore, brown and grey and green all at once. Not home. Obviously not home. You've never been here. You know nothing about it. It doesn't look like anything you've ever seen except possibly the furthest headlands of Mayo seen from a distance, and even that comparison isn't quite right. But it's land, and there's a ship on the horizon, heading east, going the other direction, and someone on your ship, Peter, the man from Galway, who's barely spoken in 31 days, says quietly, "There's Ireland on that ship," and he's right. Or something like that. The ship going east is carrying letters, maybe. Carrying somebody's cousin back for a visit that probably won't happen. Carrying news that will arrive in Carronaut in 3 months and tell your family that you're alive and in Quebec and working. You watch the ship until it's gone below the horizon. On the 19th day out of Westport, the Atlantic stops being merely unpleasant and becomes something that requires a different vocabulary entirely. You know weather. You grew up with Mayo weather, which is not timid. Atlantic gales that come off the water in October and shake the thatch and blow the turf stacks apart and make the Boreen run like a river. You know what a real storm looks like and sounds like and what it does to the world outside a stone cottage. A stone cottage bolted to the earth is one thing. A wooden ship on open water is something else. The morning of the 19th day starts wrong. The sky to the southwest, which is the direction nothing good comes from at sea, has a colour that the watermen in Westport when you boarded would have read immediately and known what it meant. You don't know what it means in the language of sailors. You know what it means in the language of people who look at the sky and feel their stomach shift before their mind catches up. The wind comes before the rain. It comes in gusts that make the ship's hull flex and groan in a register you haven't heard before. Lower, more fundamental, the sound of a structure being tested against its own tolerances. The hatches come down. The 200 of you in the hold are sealed in. What happens next is 4 hours of an education in what the Atlantic Ocean actually is when it decides to make itself known. The motion of the ship changes from the role you've adapted to, which has a kind of rhythm, a predictable period, a swell that goes up and comes down in a pattern your body has learned to ride, into something with no pattern, pitching as well as rolling. Sudden drops, the ship's nose going down into a trough between waves, and then the bow rising and the stern dropping, and everyone in the hold grabbing anything bolted down, the unsecured bundles and baskets sliding and tumbling in the dark. The sound, above everything else, the sound. The water hitting the hull, not the gentle, continuous conversation of fair weather sailing, but a series of impacts, each one a concussion that you feel in your chest, that travels through the wooden planks into your hands and your back and your feet. The wind itself, not the sound you hear through a window or a wall, but the sound of wind that is also moving a vessel, a harmonic that comes from the rigging above and through the deck, and fills the hold with a sustained note that sits right at the edge of what sound normally is. And the people, 200 people in a low hold in a storm, have a sound too. Not screaming, there's very little screaming which surprises you. More a collective noise, the compressed expression of a population of people who have no agency in this moment and are dealing with that fact according to their particular constitutions. Prayers, louder now in Irish and English both, several voices overlapping. A child somewhere in the stern section, crying with the specific note of a child too exhausted to stop. Someone laughing, which is the most alarming sound. A high, slightly frantic laugh that cuts in at irregular intervals and then is silent and then comes again. Peter from Galway grips the side of the bunk with both hands and stares at the planks above him and says nothing. His knuckles are white, his jaw is set. He looks like a man conducting a negotiation with himself about what he's going to do with the fear, and having reached the conclusion that nothing can be done with it, and therefore nothing will be shown. You hold on. Your hands on the bunk frame, the rough-cut wood, the grain of it under your palms, the splinters you're past feeling. And you watch the hold. The lantern swings wildly on its chain, throwing moving shadows across the tiers of people. You watch the shadows. You watch people's faces. You watch the boy from the first day who was sick for 30 hours, who is somewhere in the middle tier and is now sitting with his back against the hull and his eyes closed and his lips moving. The ship goes down the face of a wave. You can feel it. The whole vessel tipping forward, the angle impossible, the things that aren't held down becoming briefly airborne. And there's a sound from the bow section that might be breaking wood, or might be something shifting dramatically in the cargo that's still stored forward. And then the bow comes back up. You're still here. You're still here, and the ship is still here, and the ocean is still demonstrating its complete indifference to both of those facts. An old woman named Mayo, who has been in the bunk below you for 19 days, and has managed the crossing so far with a composure that suggested she had extensive experience being old in difficult circumstances, becomes the person you spend the storm with. Not by arrangement, by geography. She's below you and she grabs your ankle at some point during the worst of it. You're not sure when. Exactly, time has become strange and elastic, and you look down and she's looking up and she says in Irish, "Fan Liam, stay with me," and you swing down from your bunk and sit on the edge of hers and hold her hand. Her hand is small and hard, the hand of someone who has worked at something physical for 70 or more years. The skin is papery, the joints swollen and knobbed. She holds your hand with a grip that is much stronger than her size suggests. "An beef will igla ort," she says. "Are you afraid?" "Ta, go leor," you say. "Yes, enough." She nods. She accepts this as a reasonable answer. She is from a kill island, she tells you, over the sound of the storm, in the periodic gaps when the ship stabilizes briefly before the next assault. Her husband died in the spring, not of hunger, she specifies, of his own long-standing arrangements with his lungs that had been in negotiation for years. Her son is in Liverpool. Another son is in Boston. She's going to the one in Boston. "How old is he?" you ask. 24. He left in 43. She's quiet for a moment. "He'll look different." "People do," you say. "His father didn't know him when he came back for the funeral. 3 years in Liverpool and Padraig didn't know his own son." She squeezes your hand. "Not so bad, maybe. The not knowing. It means something changed enough to see." The ship goes down another trough. You both grip. "Mom hac Siran," she says. "My son, Siran. Your brother's name. Common enough, but you look at her. "That's my brother's name," you say. "Is Ia?" "Is it?" 11 years old, back in Caranaut." She looks at you for a moment. The lantern swings. Her face is lit and shadowed and lit again. "Gom beane dia do," she says quietly. "God bless him." "Agus duit fain," you say, and you. The storm continues for 2 more hours. You hold Mayor's hand through most of it. You don't talk very much. There isn't much to say that the holding of the hand doesn't already say. When the motion finally eases, the waves still significant, but the violence gone out of them, the ship settling back into something navigable. You realize your hand has gone numb from the grip of hers. You flex your fingers carefully and feel the blood come back in the familiar pins and needles of circulation returning. Mare has fallen asleep. You ease your hand free carefully, the way you'd ease away from a sleeping child. You climb back to your own bunk. Peter from Galway is still on his back, still staring at the planks. His knuckles are less white. "We made it," you say. He turns his head and looks at you. "We made it that time," he says. "On the 26th day out of Westport, a woman dies. Her name is Bridget Walsh, which is a common enough name, and she is from County Galway, and she is 31 years old, and she dies of what the ship's mate, when he comes into the hold to deal with the situation, calls fever. Fever is the word that covers many things. What it often means, in the context of famine ships, is typhus, a disease that travels in the lice that travel in the clothing of people who haven't been able to wash properly in a long time. Typhus travels with hunger, with crowding, with the specific conditions of a hold full of weakened people in unwashed clothes sharing body heat and body air. You're not close to her, physically or in acquaintance. Her bunk is in the stern section. You registered her existence the way you've registered most people on the ship. Face, approximate location. The one or two exchanges of acknowledgement that strangers in close quarters have when they're trying to remain decent. She had a daughter of about 8 and a husband who is now sitting in his bunk with a child on his lap, and an expression that is the expression of the workhouse yard in Castlebar, the expression of someone who has run out of the internal resources to show anything else. The mate and one of the sailors come with a canvas. They deal with it quickly, and with a practicality that suggests this is not, for them, the first time, and possibly not the first time on this voyage. The woman's husband stands and holds the child against his shoulder, and the child's face is turned away, and he watches them wrap his wife in the canvas, and he doesn't say anything. Father, you don't know if there's a priest on board. You haven't seen one. But an older man near the bow, who seems to have some claim to spiritual authority by virtue of age and gravity, says words. Others gather around. You go. You stand with the rest of them in the low hold, the canvas-wrapped figure laid on the boards, the lantern swinging, and listen to words in Irish that are the words said over the dead. Then they take her up through the hatch. Then she goes into the Atlantic. No grave, no marker, no particular place. The specific coordinates of wherever the ship was on that specific day. 31 years old, County Galway, a name that goes into the water with her. You think about what it means to have no grave. In a culture that has graveyards with 6 and 8 and 10 generations of the same families in them, where the dead are specifically, geographically there, in the ground outside the church, where you can go and stand. No grave means no place, no address, just water. The husband, for the rest of the crossing, sits in his bunk with the daughter and doesn't speak to anyone. The daughter speaks to you twice. Twice she asks you things. Small questions, the kind a child asks to test whether adults are still functioning, and you answer both times. You answer carefully, the way you've learned to answer Chiron. Enough truth, held at the right angle, not so much that it lands wrong. Her name is Chauvin. She's 8. She's going to her grandmother's in Quebec City. That's all you learn before the land comes. The St. Lawrence River is wider than you expected a river to be. This is inadequate. It's not a river the way the rivers you know are rivers. It's a body of water that happens to be called a river, that happens to eventually become the kind of river you'd recognize. But here near the mouth it's a mile across, 2 miles, the opposite shore a dark line that might be forest, or might be the shadow of something larger. The ship enters it in the early morning, November light. The light of a northern latitude in November, which is thin and horizontal and blue at the edges, nothing like the soft grey of an Irish November. The cold is different here too. Drier, more direct. Air that comes from somewhere inland and carries the particular message of a continent rather than an island. Cold without the Atlantic's tempering moisture. You are on deck with the others who can stand the cold, pressed to the rail, watching. The shore comes closer. Trees, spruce, you'll learn later, and birch, and others you don't have names for yet, all different from any tree in Mayo. Dark, dense, covering the hillsides above the river in an unbroken mass that has no equivalent in a country that has been mostly deforested for centuries. It's a lot of trees. Too many trees almost, in the way that anything exceeding your frame of reference is too much before you adjust the frame. And it's quiet. That's the thing that gets you first. After 32 days in the hold, after Castlebar and the relief works and the months of the townland with its constant low-level noise, the wind in the thatch, the families next door, Father Moran's horse on the road, this is a quiet of a different order. The wind moves through the trees on the shore and you can hear it individually, because there's nothing else competing. Peter comes to stand beside you at the rail. He looks at the shore for a while. Tia Nua, he says. New country. Aye. Different. He says it like he's noting a fact. Neutral. Very. He nods. He goes back below. The immigration process at Gros-Île, the quarantine island in the river before Quebec City, is what it is. You stand in a line. A medical officer looks at you, looks at your eyes, looks at your tongue, asks you questions in English, and listens to your answers with the specific attention of a man looking for reasons to say no. You are healthy enough, thin, exhausted, with hands cracked from cold and work and the voyage, but breathing right, standing upright, eyes clear enough, fever absent. He makes a mark in his ledger. You move through. Not everyone does. Bridget Walsh's husband, the man who sat in his bunk for the last days of the crossing, has a fever. He and his daughter are held at the quarantine station. You watch this happen from the line, and you watch Siobhan's face as they take her father aside, the 8-year-old face recalculating something very quickly, the expression of a child who's recently done a great deal of emergency recalculation and is becoming expert at it. You can't do anything. You move through the line, onto the dock, into Canada. Canada. The word sits in your mouth strangely. You've said it. You've been told it. But it has no texture yet, no interior. It's just the place that the ship was going and that you now appear to be in. Quebec City on a November afternoon in 1846. You've spent time imagining it. And the imagination was wrong in ways that are both better and worse than you expected. Better. It's a city. An actual city, with paved streets and proper buildings, and a harbour that works with a purposeful efficiency that Westport in all its efforts did not quite achieve. Worse, it's cold in a way that your imagination didn't fully credit, a cold that is not the damp maritime cold of Mayo, but a hard, dry, biting cold that comes from the north and finds the gaps in your coat and is impersonal about it. Not cruel, but simply absolute. And it's not Boston. You need to get south, a riverboat, and then another, and then roads. Con Malone's son's letter says, get to Montreal, then find the stage south. Then, but the details blur in memory. You have the letter. You check your coat for the letter 3 times in the first 2 hours, because the letter is the thread that connects you to the address in Boston, where there is supposedly a room and a person who knows your name. The letter is there. You stop checking. You don't have money for the boat fare from Quebec to Montreal. This is a fact you arrive at in the same empirical way. You arrive at all facts now, by looking at the situation clearly, adding up what you have, comparing it to what's required, and accepting the gap. You have 3 shillings and 4 pence. The riverboat to Montreal is 6 shillings steerage. The math is not good. What you have, in addition to the money, is a reasonably strong body and the willingness to use it, which in a port city that processes cargo and emigrant ships and general commercial business is worth something, it turns out. You work the docks for 4 days. The work, unloading barges, moving crates and barrels and bales of whatever is being moved off the flat-bottomed riverboats and onto the wharves and from the wharves into warehouses. The foreman, a French-Canadian man with a red beard and an accent that turns English into something almost unrecognisable, looks at you the first morning with the assessment of a man who has looked at many Irish backs and is estimating capacity. You work hard, he says. I do, you say. Show me, he says. He points at a barrel. You show him. He put you on the gang. The work is cold and hard and pays 14 pence a day, which is not a lot but is something, is the specific something of a number going in the right direction. You eat bread and a kind of thick soup available from a woman near the dock who has a pot over a fire and charges a penny a cup. It's not good soup. It's hot. These are its relevant properties. You sleep in a boarding house that charges 6 pence a night and where 6 men share a room, and the smell is approximately what you'd expect. Peter from Galway is in the room too. 2 other Irish men from the ship, and 2 men who arrive before you from somewhere else, who speak to each other in a language you don't recognise and ignore everyone else, with a mutual efficiency that you respect. By the 4th night you have enough. You buy your fare and you board the riverboat south. The landscape changes as you go. The deep spruce forests of the river valley give way, gradually, to something more mixed. Deciduous trees, bare in November, their branches creating a grey lace against the grey sky. Farms become visible along the river, different from Irish farms. Bigger, flatter, the fields lying open without the hedges and ditches that boundary everything in Mayo. The houses are different. Painted wood, 2 stories, with a confident verticality that stone cottages in the west of Ireland don't aspire to. You watch it all from the boat deck, cold and increasingly numb, because the alternative is to be below decks in a cabin that is stuffy and crowded and doesn't move. And moving, watching the new country come toward you, is something you find you need. The other passengers scattered on the deck are mostly going south like you. Emigrants, most of them, the same general condition as yourself. The worn clothing, the careful way of managing bundles, the expressions of people doing sums in their heads. Several are Irish. You nod at each other in the specific way of recognition that requires no further transaction. One woman, older than you, 30 perhaps, travelling alone with a bundle that she keeps between her feet, not trusting any storage, strikes up a conversation one afternoon that begins with the weather and ends up somewhere else entirely. Her name is Mary Hannigan. She's from Leitrim. She's been in Quebec since September. She arrived on an earlier ship, and has spent 2 months working in a house in the city as a domestic servant, cleaning and cooking and managing laundry for a French-Canadian family who treated her, she says, adequately, which is a word she uses with the precision of someone who has thought carefully about where it sits, relative to well and badly. She's going to her sister in Boston. Your first time in Boston, she asks. My first time in America, you say. She looks at you. It'll be strange, she says. Everything has been strange. Stranger than that, she says. In a particular way. You'll see. She's quiet for a moment. The river moves under the boat. The first thing, she says, that hits you, it's not the city. It's the people. It's that nobody knows you. Back home, everyone knows you. Your name means something. Your father's name, your grandfather's. You come into a room and people already know half the important things about you before you say a word. A pause. In Boston, you're nothing. Nobody. You have to build it all from nothing. Is that not better? She thinks about this. Some ways, she says. Some ways not. The north end of Boston is 40 years into becoming Irish by the time you arrive in December of 1846. It was Irish before the famine, meaning there were Irish people here, meaning the streets had Irish voices in them and the churches had Irish priests and the boarding houses had Irish names on the door. But what the famine is doing, what's already beginning to do, even in this first year, and will continue to do for the next decade, is change the scale and the nature and the character of the thing entirely. The ships come in at Lewis Wharf and Constitution Wharf and Long Wharf, and they come in carrying Irish, and the Irish walk off the ships and into the North End, and the North End absorbs them into its narrow streets and its tenement buildings and its particular compressed humanity. You walk off a coasting vessel from Canada onto Lewis Wharf on a grey December morning, and the city of Boston receives you with the specific welcome of a large city to a single person, which is to say, it does not notice you at all. The smell of Boston, different from Mayo, different from Quebec, different from the ship. Coal smoke like most cities, but mixed with the smell of the sea. Closer here, more present. Boston being a city that lives by its harbour the way a tree lives by its roots. And underneath those, people, horses, fish from the markets along the waterfront, something baking from somewhere you can't locate, and, faintly, at the edges, something that you'll eventually recognise as the North End specifically, the particular density of too many people in too little space, the smell of tenement living, of shared rooms and communal cooking, and the absence of the ventilation that more spacious arrangements would provide. You have Con Malone's letter. You ask directions 3 times, receiving 3 different sets of directions, 2 of which are in English and 1 in Irish, which is so flavoured by Boston that it takes you a moment. Eventually you find North Street, and on North Street the building described in the letter, and on the 3rd floor of that building a door with the number 7 on it, and you knock. The person who opens the door is a young man of about 25 with a face that looks, when you look at it, like an echo of Con Malone's face back in Carrownaught. Similar proportions, similar colouring, but run through some transformation that has made it sharper and more urban. "Are you Fionn Malone?" you say. "Ta," he says. "Yes." You show him the letter. He reads it. His own father's handwriting, you realise, watching his face move through the recognition of it. "Come in," he says. The room is small. 4 men live in it. Fionn and 3 others, all Irish, all working, all in various stages of establishing the new versions of themselves that a city requires. The room has 4 beds, 2 of which are bunks built into the wall by someone with carpentry skills and spatial efficiency. It has a window that looks onto the building opposite. It has a hearth, which is the most important thing, the hearth actually working and radiating heat into the room in a way that makes you stop in the doorway and just feel it for a moment. Warm. Specifically, actually warm. You sit down on the edge of one of the lower bunks because Fionn has gestured you toward it, and you've been standing since early morning, and the warmth of the room, and the fact of having arrived, and the specific sensation of not being on a ship for the first time in 32 days combine into something that is vertiginous. Briefly, the floor feeling more stable than it should, the walls closer than the Atlantic horizon, the world contracted to a manageable human scale. "My father's letter says you're looking for work," Fionn says. "I am." "Can you read and write?" "English and Irish both," you say. He nods. This is valuable. More valuable than you knew it would be, because a significant portion of the Irish who are arriving can't, and literacy opens doors that illiteracy keeps closed. "The docks are hiring," Fionn says. "Always hiring. It's hard work." "I know hard work." There's also a merchant on Hanover Street looking for a young man who can write in his accounts book. It's better pay, and it's inside. He looks at you. You'd have to present yourself well. You look at yourself, your coat, your cracked boots, the 3 weeks of a voyage and 4 days of dock work in Quebec. I'll need to look better than this, you say. We all did, he says. And there's something in it. Not unkindness, not pity, just the specific solidarity of a person who remembers being where you are now and considers it relevant information. He gives you a meal. It's simple. Saltfish and bread, and something he calls chowder, a thick, fishy soup that is generous and hot, and more food than you've had at one sitting in months. You eat it carefully, not quickly, because your stomach has learned to approach generosity with caution after the months of scarcity, the same way you approach any good thing now, gratefully but measuring it, not trusting it to last. Your first meal in America, saltfish and chowder in a room above a street in Boston in December 1846. The window fogged with the warmth of the room. Outside, the city going about its business, the street sounds of a city that has no idea you've arrived and wouldn't much care if it did. You're here. The merchant on Hanover Street is named Callahan, Irish, second generation, born in Boston, which means he wears his Irishness in a completely different way than you do. It sits on him lightly, a characteristic rather than an identity, the way a scar sits on someone who's forgotten the wound. He looks at you across his desk. His office is small and orderly, the ledger books on their shelves with the neatness that speaks of someone who's been managing this system for years. You can add figures, he says. Yes, sir. He hands you a page of numbers. You add them. He checks your answer with the speed of a man who knows the answer already and is testing whether you get there. You do. You can write a letter. He dictates 3 sentences to you. You write them in your best hand, which has not been exercised in some time and shows it slightly but not embarrassingly. He looks at the letter. He looks at you. 4 shillings a week, he says. 6 days. You're here when I say you're here. Yes, sir. You're Irish off the boat, he says, not unkindly, as a statement of fact. Half the men I've hired off the boat lasted less than a month. I've lasted so far, you say. Something crosses his face. Not quite a smile. 4 shillings, he says. We'll see. You take it. You shake his hand. You go back to the room on North Street and tell Fionnan, who nods and says good, in the way of someone for whom good is a complete sentence. The work is not hard in the physical sense. It's the management of paper, invoices, orders, correspondence, the ledger entries that track the movement of goods through Callahan's business, which is the import and distribution of dry goods and some hardware. You sit at a desk and you write and you add and you file, and you occasionally deal with delivery men who come to the back door and need forms signed. After the relief works, after the dock work in Quebec, after the months of digging and carrying and the cold and the weight, sitting at a desk in a warm room with a pen in your hand feels for the first week almost surreal. Your hands don't know what to do with the not working. They're accustomed to the spade and the basket and the hammer, to the grip and the pull, to work that leaves marks on them. The pen is light, too light. You hold it harder than necessary the first few days, and your wrist gets tired at the wrong angle. You adjust. You learn the desk. You learn Callahan's system, which is not complex but is specific. He wants things done in a particular order, in a particular way, and once you know the order and the way he's satisfied, he's not warm, not exactly, but he's fair in the way of a man who knows what fair means in a business context and applies it consistently, which you've learned to value over warmth that doesn't follow through. December, the 3rd week. You write home. You've been composing this letter in your head since the 19th day on the ship. when you had nothing to do but hold Mayor's hand and plan what you would say when you got to say something. You've revised it dozens of times in your head, adjusting for the various developments: Quebec, the dock work, the boat south, Boston, Callahan's desk. The letter you actually write is shorter than any of the versions in your head. You write it at Callahan's desk on a Sunday morning, when the office is empty and you have permission to use a sheet of paper and the ink. You write it in Irish, because your father's English is functional, but your mother's is less so, and you want your mother to read this herself rather than have it translated for her. You tell them you arrived. You tell them you're working. You tell them about Fionnan Malone and the room on North Street. You do not tell them about the storm or about Bridget Walsh or about Chauvin Walsh watching her father being taken to the quarantine station, because these are things that would cost your mother more than they're worth to know. You tell them, Ta miseart go Leo. I am all right. You write it twice. Once, plainly. Again, meaning it. I am all right. Stating it until it's not just a reassurance, but a fact being made in the stating of it. You tell Ciaran there are potatoes, different ones, plenty. You tell Oif you're coming for her as fast as you can arrange it. That's not a reassurance, that's a schedule. You tell your father, Rina me'e, I did it, I made it, the way he asked you to say it when you did, not as pride, just as report. You tell your mother, and this is the part you've rewritten most often in your head, the part where the previous versions were longer and said more and kept being wrong in the way that too much language is wrong when not enough will do. You tell your mother, Quim ni mort gashla, I think of you every day. And then you fold it and pay the postage from the small sum you've set aside specifically for this, and you walk to the post office on Washington Street, and you hand it over the counter. 3 months to arrive, 2 months for a reply, if there is one. 5 months for you to know anything in response to what you've just sent. You walk back to North Street through a Boston December, the cold air smelling of the harbour, the streets dark with evening, the windows of the tenements lit amber and orange from inside. 5 months. In 5 months, if all goes as it can go, your family will know you're here. You're here. January 1847, which is the year they'll call Black 47, the worst year, the year when the second total crop failure compounds everything that the first year started, when 1 million people who are already weakened by a year of scarcity encounter a second year of it and cannot hold. You don't know this in January. You know your own situation. You know Callahan's ledgers, and the room on North Street, and the walk to work along Hanover Street in the cold, and the specific Boston January cold, which is not Mayo cold. It's crystalline still, with a clarity that Mayo's damp never has, the air clean and sharp in the throat. You save money. This is the primary occupation of your existence in Boston, beyond the work itself. You save money the way a farmer saves seed potatoes, carefully, only spending what must be spent, protecting the store from the various forces that would diminish it, treating every penny as a decision. Callahan increases your wages slightly in February. He says nothing by way of explanation, and you ask for none. He looks at the quality of the ledger work over 3 months, and he increases the wages, and that's the conversation. You write a second letter home, shorter than the first, same message, different details. March, April, you count. The letter from home arrives in May, 5 months and 3 weeks, which is about right, and Fionnan takes it from the landlady who receives the building's post, and he hands it to you when you come in from work, and the handwriting on the outside is your father's. the careful, slightly laboured English of his second language, the address of Callahan's merchant house where you receive correspondence. You take it upstairs. You sit on the edge of the bunk. You open it. It's in Irish, your mother's handwriting this time, and she writes the way she speaks, directly, economically, more information per sentence than most people manage per paragraph. Everyone is alive. This is the first thing. She states it first, before anything else, because she knows what you've been afraid to ask. Your father, herself, Aoife, Kieran, alive. They are managing. The word managing doing the same heavy lifting in Irish that it does in English. The relief works have continued into spring. Father Moran has organised some additional distribution from the Quaker relief supplies. The pit is very low, but they've made it to April. The spring planting is going in. This sentence, the spring planting is going in, lands in you the way things land when you've been waiting for them, when the waiting has been so long and so loaded that the arrival of the news doesn't feel like relief, so much as like a sound stopping that you've been hearing so long you forgot it was there. The spring planting, your father's hands in the earth, the lazy beds your grandfather made, the ridges, the sea potatoes cut and set at the proper depth. The planting is going in. Your mother writes, Coinish ort, keep at it, tagra again do it, we love you. Cumani aran continuera biuntu maith dudulamha. Remember the county when you're good to your hands. This last phrase, which doesn't quite translate, which means something like, remember where you came from when you're using the skill it taught you. Remember the hard hands that made you. Xieran has written a line at the bottom in the careful script of a child who's been learning his letters. And befwyl aeon frata an. Are there any potatoes there? You laugh. You actually laugh. In the room on North Street in May of 1847, your hands shaking slightly with the letter in them, and the laugh is real and involuntary and has some quality in it of things being released that have been held too long. There are potatoes here, a gra. There are potatoes. Plenty. This is what your evenings look like in the first year in Boston. You come back from Callahan's at 6 or 6:30. The room is usually occupied by at least 2 of the 4 of you. Someone has generally done something about food. A rotation of responsibility, not formal but understood, the way things are understood between people sharing a small space. It might be bread and herring bought from the market on the way home. It might be the thick chowder from the woman 2 streets over who sells it from a pot by the door every weekday. It might be something cooked on the hearth, if the evening's cook has the time and the energy and the inclination. You eat together or separately depending on timing. You talk or don't talk depending on the day. Fianan is good company in the particular way of someone who has interesting things to say and doesn't feel the need to say all of them. He's been in Boston 3 years. He knows things, which streets are dangerous and at what hours, which employers are decent and which aren't, which churches have the best networks for the newly arrived Irish, where to find work if Callahan's ever goes sideways. He dispenses this information casually, as conversation, not as instruction. You're going to want to join the Hibernian Society eventually, he says one evening. What's that? Irishmen helping Irishmen, money for the sick, references for work, connections. He pauses. In this city, who you know is the thing. Back home you know everyone because everyone's been there forever. Here you build it. Mary Hannigan said something like that on the boat, you say. Mary Hannigan is right. You listen to the city outside the window. Boston at night is not as loud as you expected a city to be, or perhaps you've adjusted to it the way you adjusted to the ship's motion, so that what was the once overwhelming noise has become simply the ambient sound of the place you live, background, unremarkable. Somewhere below, someone is singing in Irish, a slow air, one you don't know the title of but know the sound of, the particular melismatic quality of the older songs, the voice moving around the note rather than landing squarely on it. Someone from home, recently arrived, still carrying the music fresh. You listen to it for a while. Fionnan is reading a newspaper, the Boston Pilot, which is the Irish paper, which covers Irish affairs in Ireland and Irish affairs in Boston, and functions as the nervous system connecting the two. The news from home, Fionnan says, turning a page, evictions up, Westport workhouse overcrowded. He turns another page, 1,400 arrived this week alone at East Boston Pier. 1,400 this week alone. You think about the yard outside the Castlebar workhouse, the woman with the child, the man on the stone who sat down and didn't get up. There'll be more, you say. There'll be a lot more, he says. He reads for a while. You watch the fire. By July you've been in Boston 7 months, which seems impossible and also inevitable and also exactly as long as it's been. The city changes in summer. It opens up. The narrow streets, which in January felt like compression, walls of brick and the grey sky above a strip of it, feel different when the sky is blue and the harbour is active with the full summer shipping trade, and the trees in whatever parks exist have their leaves on. It's not a beautiful city in the way you might have imagined a city being beautiful. It's too dense, too crowded, too mixed in its intentions. But it's alive in a way that the winter version of it wasn't quite. You've saved 11 shillings and sixpence toward Oif's passage. Not enough yet. The passage from Liverpool, the cheapest route through England first, is 35 shillings steerage. You're calculating the months. You walk a lot. Boston on a Sunday, when you're not working, when the city moves at a different pace. You learn the streets, not just the route from North Street to Hanover Street, but the wider geography, the shape of the city. The common, where the city maintains a space of green that feels almost aggressive in its greenness against the brick. The Faneuil Hall Market, the vendors and the noise and the smell of it. The harbour itself, where the ships come in from everywhere, and you can stand and watch them the way you stood at the rail of the St. Columba coming into Quebec. But from the other direction now, you stand at the harbour and look at the ships and you think about the crossing. The storm, Mayo from Achille, Pedar from Galway, who went on to somewhere further west. You lost track of him in Quebec. Chauvin Walsh, whose father was left on the quarantine island, and what became of them. You never know what becomes of most people you meet in transit. They pass through your life in the specific way that people pass through the lives of people in motion. Close, briefly, then gone, carried off by their own trajectories. You're made of their passing in some way you can't fully account for. A ship is coming into the wharf, big one, 3 masts deep in the water, well laden. You watch the dock workers prepare for its arrival, the choreography of lines and hooks and gangplanks, everything that has to be ready before the ship reaches the dock. The preparation for arrival that the arriving can't see until they're already there. How it must have looked to someone on the deck, the city coming closer, Boston resolving from a shape on the horizon into a specific place with specific streets and specific people waiting, and among those people, somewhere in the North End, at a desk on Hanover Street, at a window on a summer evening, you write home once a month, every month. This is not a small thing. Paper costs. Postage costs more. Every letter is a calculation. Can you afford the paper this month? Is the news worth the cost? And of course, the news is worth the cost. The question is whether the cost is survivable, and you make the calculation the same way every time, because the cost is survivable, and the alternative of your family going 3 months without news is not acceptable. You write in Irish. You report. You tell them specific things. The wages, the savings, the state of the room on North Street. You tell them about the city. Not too much of the city. Not the size of it. Not the ways it is overwhelming. Not the specific loneliness of being in a place where no one knows your name in the deep way that names carry meaning. Because those things don't help anyone. You tell them there is work, there is money, it's increasing. You tell them wheat is coming in November. This is the line you write in September when the savings finally reach the passage money. When you go to the shipping agent on Atlantic Avenue and buy a prepaid ticket for a woman travelling from Cobh in County Cork. You send the ticket home with the letter. You explain she goes to Cork, she boards the ship goes to Liverpool, the Liverpool ship goes to Boston. You will be at the dock. Your mother writes back in 2 months. Buochas le dia. Thanks be to God. November. The ship from Liverpool docks at East Boston on a Tuesday. You take the ferry across the harbour. You wait at the dock with the others. There are always others, always family members waiting, always the particular crowd that assembles when a ship from Ireland is expected. Irish faces, Irish voices, the whole specific atmosphere of people who are waiting for people they last saw in a different country. The ship comes in. The gangplank goes down. People come off. A stream of people. The worn clothes and the careful bundles and the expressions of the newly arrived. People looking for the people who are waiting for them. You look. You look through faces, through the crowd, through the movement of the disembarkation, and there is Alwefer. 14, no, 15 now, she's 15, October birthday, which she spent on a ship in the Atlantic, which is something the two of you will have to talk about. She's taller than she was. The face is the same face, but with something added to it. The same determination you remember, but more of it. More settled. More. She sees you at almost the same moment you see her, and something in her face resolves. She walks down the gangplank carrying her bundle under one arm, and she comes through the crowd and she stops in front of you. Well, she says. Well, you say. And she hugs you quickly and fiercely and then steps back and looks around at East Boston and the harbour and the city across the water. Right, she says. Show me everything. Winter 1847, moving toward 1848. The room on North Street is now 6 people. Aoife has found a position as a domestic servant in a house in Beacon Hill. Live-in, which means she doesn't sleep at North Street but comes on Sunday afternoons. And on Sunday afternoons the room is busy and Irish and occasionally loud, and the 7 months of Boston you have on her mean you can tell her things about the city that she doesn't know yet, and the month she has on you of home means she can tell you things about Carrownaught that you haven't heard, and the afternoons are full. She tells you. The spring planting came up. Not great. Not what a proper harvest should be. But it came up. The blight was less severe in 1847 in your particular townland. Father Moran's networks brought some additional relief. Your father worked through the summer and into the autumn, and the pit is better than it was. Ciaran is 12. He's getting big, she says. He has your father's hands. Your mother is fine, she says, with the same emphasis you'd put on the same word. The emphasis that means not worse, not better, holding. Your father sends a message through Oif. Maith and Macthu, good son. This is the most he'd send and the most you'd expect, and it is coming through Ulwerfer's voice in the north end of Boston on a November Sunday, exactly enough. This is the arithmetic that matters. In 1847, more than 1 million people leave Ireland. Some go to Liverpool and stay, some go to Boston and New York and Quebec. Some go to Australia, the cheapest passage for the very poorest, paid by landlords like Colonel Staunton, who have discovered that it's cheaper to pay a tenant's passage than to feed them through a famine. The ones who leave are not by any measure the lucky ones in a simple sense. They leave because they have just enough left to leave with. The ones who have nothing left don't leave. They're in the ditches, in the workhouses, in the graveyards outside the churches with no headstones, in the water. 1 million die, 1 million leave, and then more leave, and then more. By 1851, Ireland's population has fallen by 25%. This is not a statistic. This is your townland with 1/4 of its people gone. This is the fields that nobody is farming because the farmers are dead or in Boston or in Liverpool. This is the cottages with the roofs off, the thatch gone, the walls beginning to fall back into the landscape that made them. You don't know these numbers in 1847 or 1848. You live inside them without being able to see their shape. You know your family. You know your room on North Street. You know Callahan's ledgers. But you also know Mayo from a chill, asleep with her hand in yours in a storm, and Siobhan Walsh, 8 years old, recalculating, and the man on the stone on the relief scheme who sat down and didn't get back up, and old Daignan with both his fields gone, and the widow O'Brien's son at your door with his face showing what asking for help cost him. You're made of all of these. You carry them the way Ireland carries them. Not as a weight exactly, not as something that slows you, but as something that's present, that's there, that insists on being acknowledged by anyone who looks at you carefully. This is what Ngorta Mór makes of a people. The knowledge, cellular and permanent, that the world is not guaranteed, that the thing you depend on can be taken, that the ground itself can turn against you, and also the knowledge that you can go anyway, that you can walk 12 miles to a ship, that you can hold an old woman's hand in a storm, that you can write a letter home every month, every single month, because the connection matters, because the thread between where you are and where you come from matters, and if you maintain the thread, then neither end of it is entirely alone. The night comes as nights do. December again, 1847, or 1848, or 1850, or the specific December you're lying in right now. Your breathing slowing, the world outside, wherever you are getting quieter. The fire in the room on North Street is a small fire, carefully managed, not wasteful. Enough heat to take the edge off the December cold, not more than enough. Eve is across the city in Beacon Hill, asleep in the small room off the kitchen that is hers and cold but private. Ciaran is in Carrownaught, 12 years old, asleep in the cottage with your parents, the mattress on the platform, the fire banked to its overnight brick of turf. Your parents are asleep. The field, empty in December, the ridges turned over and resting, waiting for the spring planting, is quiet under the December sky. The pit is covered. Whatever is in it is protected against the frost. And here, in the north end of Boston, in a room above a street above a harbour that connects to the Atlantic, that connects to an island 3,000 miles east, you are lying still. The sounds, The city, muffled by walls and distance and December, and the particular quality of the city at this hour, which is not silent but is quiet in the way that cities are quiet when most of their people are asleep. A cart on cobblestones somewhere below, a voice, briefly, then gone. The particular settling creak of an old building in cold weather, the wood contracting, the joints of it making small sounds. Fionn is asleep in his bunk. His breathing is even, the breathing of a man who has made his peace with where he is. Your hands at rest on the blanket are the hands of a year and a half of the new life. The dock work has faded from them, the worst of the cracks healed, the blisters gone. Callahan's pen has made different marks on them, the faint callus of the inside third finger where it holds the writing instrument. But underneath that, still there, the hands that check the potato pit twice a week in the dark, the hands that went into cold soil and felt for the round solidity of a healthy potato, and knew the difference by touch alone between that and its ruined version. Those hands don't go away. They're under everything else. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. These three things which for a year were not guaranteed, which for a year required conscious daily maintenance to keep them from becoming untrue, they're true tonight. Simply true, without effort, without the anxiety of counting and rationing and calculating. You've earned this rest. You walked 12 miles to a ship. You crossed the Atlantic in November. You showed up at Callahan's office and added the numbers correctly, and then added them again every day after that. You sent for your sister. You're sending for your brother. You wrote home every month. Let the sounds of the city go. Let the December cold stay outside the walls where it belongs. Let the fire burn at its own rate, doing what fires do, the small world of the hearth unchanged from any fire in any place. The same basic process, turf or coal or wood, converting one thing to heat and light, and the small comfort of a moving thing in a still room. Let your hands rest. Let the arithmetic stop. Let the pit be covered, and the planting wait for spring, and the letters be in transit and everything in motion continue to move at its own pace, without your watching it. The sound of breathing, Fionnan's, steady and slow, your own, matching it, without trying. The creak of the building, the city further and further, somewhere in the Atlantic, because there is always a ship crossing the Atlantic, always someone in transit, always someone in the middle of the crossing that is never the same twice, but is always the same crossing. A wooden hull moves through dark water, and in that hull, someone going west for the first time, someone with 4 shillings and a letter in their coat, and a name they're hoping will mean something when they get where they're going. They'll make it, or they'll do everything that can be done, which is the only version of making it available to any of us. Centuries will pass. The north end of Boston will transform beyond recognition. The Irish families will move out to other neighbourhoods as they prosper, and other immigrants will move in, and the streets will carry different languages and different smells. The room above North Street will be renovated and subdivided, and eventually converted into something that bears no resemblance to the room where Fionnan and 3 others, and eventually you slept 4 to a room in the winter of 1847. The field in Carronaut, your grandfather's lazy beds, the ridges that held the lumper potatoes, the pit behind the cottage, will be farmed for another generation, and then another, and then the family will be fewer, and the land will be consolidated, and the particular ridges your grandfather made will be ploughed over into something flat and efficient. The cottage will stand for a long time, longer than you'd expect. And then the thatch will go, and the roof will go, and the walls will fall, and the stones will be taken for something else. 'cause stone is too useful to leave in a ruin, and where the cottage was there will be a slight irregularity in the ground, a pattern in the grass that aerial photography, 150 years later, will reveal as the footprint of a house. The people who walked that ground, whose hands went into that earth, who checked that pit in the dark, they'll be gone, every one of them. But something persists. The connection between a field and the person who worked it, the memory of cold hands in colder soil, the specific knowledge, inherited but also rebuilt fresh in every generation that touches the ground, that the world is not guaranteed and the work must be done anyway. The Irish in Boston carried this. Their children carried it differently, as a story, then as a part of the story, then as background. The great-grandchildren of Seamus Omer Chew might not know his name or his field or the year of the crossing, but they know something. Some version of the knowledge lives in them. Some version of the hands that went into the soil. Some things don't leave. Let sleep take you. The way the Atlantic took the ship. The way the ship took you west. The way the West received you and asked what you could do, and you told it, every day, by doing it. Let the night close around the day the way the Atlantic closed around everything behind you. Let the sounds thin. Let the voices go. Let the fire do its small, warm work. Let your hands, which have worked today, rest. Let your mind, which has been running since before the light, finally slow. There is nothing you need to count right now. There's nothing that needs adding up. The pit is covered. The letter is sent. The ship is in the water, moving on its own. The field will wait for spring. This is what rest is. Not the absence of everything. Not silence. Not stillness. Not the absence of the world outside the window and the city below and the 3,000 miles of water between here and the island where your family is sleeping. All of that is still there, but it can be there without you watching it. It can go on without your attention, the way the seasons went on before you understood them and will go on after you've stopped counting them. Rest is not absence. Rest is trust. The night deepens. Somewhere on the Atlantic there is always a ship. Always. A wooden vessel is moving west, carrying people who are going through what you went through, experiencing the storm and the 31st day, and the cold of a new city and the letter home and the waiting for the reply. They'll find their way, or they'll do everything available to them, which is all any of us can do with the world as it is. You found yours. You are here. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. Sleep now. The way Mayo from Achill slept after the storm, her hand in yours, her breathing steady, her body deciding that enough had been survived for one day and it was time to stop. The way Kieran sleeps in Carronaut, his face smoothed out by it. The 12-year-old finally just a boy asleep, not a hungry boy or a worried boy or a boy watching the adults for signals about what's coming. Just a boy, asleep, in the dark, safe enough, warm enough, fed enough. Let it come. It's coming. It's already here, at the edges of everything, the way light comes at the edges of a door before you open it. Let it in. Good night.